Then he wrote to Lord Rickard Stark, demanding ransom for his son and commanding him to come to King's Landing as well. He said the words stonily and dread flickered in her heart. What happened? Your father announced that Rickard Stark was also a traitor. Lord Stark demanded a trial by combat. Your father granted his wish. When, fully armored, he arrived in the throne room of the Red Keep, your father announced that he had chosen a champion to fight him. Fire. She blinked. I have never heard of a Lord Fir. And I thought that all the Black Fires were dead. There was pity in the look he now directed at her. Not a man. Fire as in the element. Lord Stark was suspended in his armor from the rafters, and Aes had his pyromancers build a fire beneath him, which was then lit. And as Rickard Stark burned to death, Brandon Stark watched it all, with a sword just out of reach and a special collar around his neck. The more he struggled to reach the sword, the more the collar tightened. Your father's orders, all of it. And that is why the North will never follow a Targaryen. And that started the rebellion. Dany's stomach turned over and she felt her skin go cold and clammy. No, she choked eventually. No, Lyra looked at her and gasped, but it was too late. She darted to one side of the road and then fell to her knees and voided her stomach. No, she said again when she was able to, through a burning throat and a haze of tears. I don't believe it. I can't. The Northman was standing to one side and looking abashed. I am sorry, he said hesitantly. I should have found a less blunt way to tell you. But you had to know. I am sure that your brother has his own version. Lyra reached into her basket and pulled out a stone jar with a cork sealing it. She pulled it open and handed it to her. She took it with a shaking hand and drank from it. It was some kind of water flavored with lemon and sugar, and it was delicious. Thank you, she said huskily, before standing again. And I do not believe you. Ser Jorah and Lyra looked at her and then looked at each other, before shrugging. Ask anyone you like about the events of the rebellion. Apart from your brother. Lyra said flatly. They walked back the hill in silence, Dany on rather shaky legs. As they reached the mansion, she could see that the doors were open, and then Magister Mapatis was watching them. He had a look of carefully hidden irritation at her. Princess, he rumbled, I was about to send people out to search for you. But I see that this good sir has found you. She was in the square where the company of the Rose were assembled. Lyra here saw her and also saw that there were some there who were viewing her with some suspicion. So we, with the approval of Lord Krutz, the leader of the company, got her out of there with a small stratagem. It worked. My thanks. The Magister said, and then he looked at her more closely. Princess, you seem upset. Her thoughts were in a jumble. I did not think that I was in any danger. I know that I was wrong now. Your pardon, Magister. Ser Jorah, Lyra, my thanks. And then she walked to her room. She had a great deal to think about. And she wanted to be sick again, at the thought of her father and the things that he had allegedly done. Jorah. He watched the child go and mentally shook his head. The Targaryen girl had just had some of her illusions shattered, and he had been the person to do it. Well, it had to be done. The gods alone knew what other rubbish her brother had poured into her head. Mapatis tilted his head at him. Thank you for finding her. Lyra concealed a slight scowl at being ignored and then stepped back as the Magister gestured at Jorah to step closer. You said that you spoke to Krutz. What did he say? Jorah thought deeply for a long moment. He said something most odd. That they were going back to the north because they had heard a message. A call. From the north. What message? From whom? Winterfell, or so Krutz thought. As to how it was delivered, he said that he came awake in the middle of the night, with the words ringing through him. Words. The others come. The Stark calls for aid. You are needed. Mapatis stared at him as if he was mad. The others. They return because of a legend. They seem certain of it. I shall return to talk to them again. They plan some ceremony this evening. He paused, assessing his next words. Coming after what I heard about the Dothraki. Magister, something has changed in this world. The company of the Rose feel a pull back to the north, a need to be there. And I also feel it. I have for many days now. The Magister's stare changed slightly. It was still intent, but there was more considered thought behind it now. Curious, he muttered after a long moment. Word has come from Old Town. The glass candles can be relit. He heard a gasp from behind him and he turned to see that Lyra had both hands over her mouth in shock. She noticed his look and then blushed a little and ducked her head in apology. Not that Mapatis seemed to notice. Instead he seemed to be so deep in thought that nothing could possibly make him notice anything. And then he seemed to return from wherever his mind had taken him. This changes everything, he muttered. Then he paused. If it's all true, that is. The grey waste means the 5 forts. And then, he cut himself off, nodded at Jorah and then turned and walked back into his mansion, calling over his shoulder, I will send word to Varys. Jorah watched him go and then turned to Lyra. Feel like another walk down the hill? A little exercise never did anyone any harm, she replied with a smile, and then she linked arms with him and they walked back down the road. Where did you get the food? I wanted to get something for supper. Good that I did. He frowned and then shook his head. Her brother never told her. The swine. He is a Targaryen, Jorah. The dragons always held themselves to be above all others. He remembered the aftermath of the Trident and then the Red Keep afterwards. The bodies being brought from the Black Cells. The tales of Varys and his last days of insanity and barbarity, the burning alive of anyone who crossed him, the torture and the mindless cruelty. We are well rid of them. She peered at him worriedly. And then they passed down the road to the square. There they found that the crowd was now quieter and also organized into groups that formed a great circle, each group having a furled flag. There was a tension in the air now, something that he could almost taste. Lyra tightened her grip a little on his arm but stood next to him. Your cousins wish you two to stand with them, said a voice to one side, and he noticed that the stone was standing to one side, leading a horse and holding a furled flag himself. Behind the horse stood a younger version of the stone, along with a woman who looked like his wife and 4 other children of varying size. When you are with them we shall begin. Jorah looked around in some confusion, but then walked with Lyra over to where the women that the stone had pointed out to him were waiting. They seemed to be amused, irked and expectant all at the same time. Cousin, one of them, Lyra said. Well met. Then she frowned. We have much to talk about. You resemble our grandfather, by the way. She spoke with such an intensity and with such a look of wry and angry humor that he was instantly reminded of Mage, and all of a sudden he wanted to hug her and weep for what he had lost. However, she'd probably box his ears and tell him not to be a great dunderheaded fool, so he restrained himself and instead looked back to the stone, who was walking with his horse and his family to the center of the circle. There he took the furled flag from his son and grounded its spiked base next to his foot. We are the company of the Rose. The stone cried in a loud voice. With our kith and kin. We are the sons and daughters of those who did not bend the knee to the dragons. We are those who remember the vow made by our ancestors. We remember. For many long years who have remained here in Essos, as was agreed. This was interesting, Jorah thought. Agreed by whom? But now everything has changed. We have heard the call. The call home. The call from Winterfell. The others come. We all know it. We all feel it. The crowd rumbled in agreement and approval. I know that we are bound by the oath that our ancestors swore. But there is an older oath that we must obey, an older calling. We are of the North. We must always rally there when the call comes to fight the Long Night, to fight the oldest enemy of our people. How could we not? How could any man or woman of the North fail to rally against such a threat? Could I? No. Could you? No. The crowd bellowed back and Jorah was startled to find that he had shouted too. Lyra looked at him and then wiped the tears from his face with a quick finger and a fond smile. Then we must return home. Who will go with me? Who will heed the call? Which of the houses who sent their exiles to the east will return? He turned to face the various groups and then raised a hand to the one in front of him. Will you? House Bolton will. House Sewin will. House Glover will come. House Karstark too. And House Hornwood. House Mormont will answer the call. Alice bellowed, leaving his ears ringing a bit and reminding him again of Mage. House Red Stark will follow. Jorah jerked his head at that. House Red Stark. Where had they come from? And House Ryder. And that shook him like nothing else. Where had they been hiding? There hadn't been a rider in the north since the arrival of the Targaryens, and then he started to wonder again about how this company had been founded. Then he drew his attention back to the square. A few other houses had announced that they were going, and then a tall man with 3 tall sons and 2 tall daughters stepped forwards. And House Umber. We too will answer the call. The stone looked about the square and Jorah could see the shining tracks of tears on his face. And my house too, he rumbled, before raising his voice again. We name ourselves true again. House Stark returns home. And then he unfurled the banner and shook it a little so that the wind could catch the cloth. The direwolf caught the breeze and boomed and snapped. As did the other banners as the men and women bearing them lifted them in the air. There was a moment of silence and then the cheering started. Someone slapped Jorah on the back and he smiled as he wiped the tears from his cheeks. Why was he crying? Why did he feel so home with a group of strangers, even if some of them were kin? Was it the fact that he felt what they all did? When he was finally able to, he turned to see Lyra looking at him with a smile of her own and also eyes filled with tears. You are going back with them, aren't you? Lyra said in his ear. He frowned and then nodded. If I can get passage with them, yes. Jorah, it will be dangerous. I have to go. I am drawn there, drawn home, like they are. I will risk it. She peered at him, with large eyes. Then she nodded as if she had seen something in his face that made up her own mind. Very well. I shall go with you, share your risk and face your fate with you. He opened his mouth to protest, but she laid a finger over his lips. This is not something we will debate. I have decided it. He looked at her for a long moment and then he pulled her to him and kissed her fiercely, hearing his cousins cheer him on with a number of rude comments. And he felt something that he had not sensed within him for some time. Hope. Arya. The brands guttered and flared as father and the others approached the door. She had run to fetch father as fast as her legs could take her, leaving Jon in the crypt. When she returned having run ahead of the others, Jon hadn't moved a muscle, still staring at the door. Father stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the door, forcing the others behind him to slow a little. When he started walking again he could see that he must have summoned a lot of people after she burst into his solar and gabbled that he had to come to the crypts at once as she and Jon had found a door that they had never seen before, with a direwolf carving. She could see Robb behind father, and mother. Maester Lewin was there, and Domeric, the great Jon too. And then bringing up the rear was Theon and a bright-eyed and inquisitive Bran. They all came to a halt before the door and stared at it. I see that you were right, father said eventually, before smiling at them both wryly. Well done. Arya, why were you down here? Mother asked with more than a little curiosity combined with exasperation. She rolled her eyes for a moment. Avoiding Septum Ordain would be the wrong thing to say, even if it was accurate. Getting out of stupid embroidery was another accurate answer. I was looking for Jon, she said eventually. I saw him come down here. Everyone looked at Jon, who looked back at father evenly. Today is Aunt Lyanna's birthday, father. I lit a candle in her name, in front of her statue. Father closed his eyes for a long moment. He said eventually in a thick and regretful voice. I had forgot that. He opened his eyes and there was approval in them now. You did right by your aunt. Good lad. And then he shook himself a little and stepped closer to the door. Now this is interesting. I have never seen this here before. I wonder how long it has been open. Robb stepped forwards and joined their father as they examined. Then something seemed to strike him. Father. The night of the direwolf you vanished when you were possessed by our ancestor. When I saw you next you were coming up from the crypts, from here. What if Edric Stark knew of this place and how to open the door? Father seemed to think about this for a moment and then nodded. Ah, that might well be it. Then he reached out and pulled on the door. It didn't move. Frowning he handed his brand to Robb and pulled with both hands. It still didn't move. Oh, in the name of the old gods, Ned, give over. Let me have a go. And the great John stumped over, gave his brand to Arya with a smile and then braced himself and hauled on the door. Something groaned, either the great John or the door frame, and then there was a grating noise as the big man forced the door open. Once it was fully open he released it and then turned back to father. There you go, Ned, he panted. Needs a little oil though. Father grinned at his old friend. And then he seemed to sober himself as he took back his brand from Robb, before stepping up to the doorway. And then he seemed to take a deep breath and stepped forwards into the dark room beyond. As the others also followed him, Arya squirmed with impatience, before finally squeezing in through the door at the same time as Bran, who protested vehemently. And then they both fell silent and still as they saw what was in front of them. There were tombs lining the sides of the room. Pairs of tombs, in fact. And statues too, also in pairs. Man and direwolf. Women too. Everyone stared around the dark, dusty room in some shock. By the gods, Theon said eventually. He was staring at one of the statues intently. Then he bent down and brushed the dust from a carving at the foot of the statue, before straightening and then stepping back in what looked like shock. Lord Stark. This is Edric Stark's tomb. He and his direwolf, Thorn. He died 1,000 years ago. Father strode over and peered at the carvings. Then he looked around at the tombs and there was an odd look to his face. Wargs, he said eventually. The legends were true. The Starks were wargs. Father Robb said quietly. Then he looked at father. But are we still wargs? Arya felt her eyes widen. Wargs. Men and women. Who could step into the minds of animals? And direwolves too. She shifted from foot to foot quickly and then she looked around the room. Robb looked almost wistful. Jon looked thoughtful, as did Bran. The great Jon looked stunned, whilst Domeric looked almost happy. Odd. Lewin's face was a picture of concentration and mother, well, she looked shocked and more than a little resigned. Also a little green for some reason. She wondered why. And then she caught sight of a statue of a woman with a direwolf just to one side and darted over to it, rubbing on the inscription to read the name. This one's Daisy Stark. And her direwolf huntress. She looked about the room in delight and then she paused. Father, why did they hide this place? By the look on father's face he did not know. Yet. Brynden. Anyone who had ever lived in the Riverlands or the Vale was well acquainted with rain. But that didn't mean that he had to like it. Brynden looked up at the sky sourly and then pulled the hood of his old campaign cloak a little further down so that the rain would hopefully stop dripping on his nose, and not for the first time blessed old Sir Dalbert, the man who had given it to him so many years ago. A seemingly trivial thing, but he had cared for it over the long years and it had kept him dry. He thought back to the War of the Ninepenny Kings for a moment and then snorted a little. Had it really been so long ago? The rain eased a little and he looked at the road ahead. Where was he going? West. Why was he going southwest? He didn't bloody know. He wondered how much of a mess his successor was making as the Knight of the Gate and shuddered a little. Hopefully Arryn had appointed someone competent. Which brought the issue again of why he was going southwest. He still didn't know. The road wound through a wood and he watched the trees cautiously. There was the occasional problem with idiots with blunt swords who thought that they could rob people. His brother tended to make object lessons of them. Then he paused a moment. Speak of the devil. There were two bodies on the side of the road ahead, both with crude weapons next to them, or what remained of them. The old swords looked as if something had shattered them, and the men looked as if what had shattered their swords had been a far better and sharper sword. He nodded in satisfaction. Good, clean strokes. The rain lifted as he passed through the far end of the little wood and he peered at the horizon. The great bulk of Harrenhal was off to his right and he winced a little as he looked at it. He disliked that place, there was indeed something cursed about it. He rode on, glancing up at the sky and assessing the sun. It was going down and at some point he'd have to think about where to sleep. The last inn was far behind him and he didn't know where the next one was. This wasn't a big road, nor a busy one. He'd normally make do with sleeping under a tree wrapped in his cloak, but judging by the cloud with a curtain of rain beneath it on the horizon, that might not be a good idea tonight. An hour later he was sure that he needed shelter. It was going to be a wild and wet night by the flash of lightning ahead. Longshanks was a pretty stoic horse, but he didn't want him too spooked by the bad weather. And then, as dusk started to fall, as well as a fine drizzle, he saw the great bulk of a crag to his right, and beneath that crag the light of what looked like a fire. He narrowed his eyes a little, remembering the bodies that lay far behind him, and then shrugged a little. If they were willing to share the fire, then he could bring food. If they were not, he could find another place. And if they eyed his possessions and then tried to rob him, then he'd provide a messy object lesson. As he approached the fire he dismounted, and as he led Longshanks along he noticed a few things. The fire was in the mouth of what looked like a south-facing cave, one with enough of an overhang of rock over it that it was sheltered from the rain. And there was a figure there, standing behind the fire. A tall man, cloaked and hooded, but with one hand on the pommel of a longsword. He was peering at Brindon suspiciously. He sighed and stopped, before raising his free hand. "Ho there! I saw your fire and with your leave would share it. 'Tis a foul enough night and I have food I can share. Bread and salt for a start." The figure seemed to relax a hair at the mention of bread and salt and then nodded slowly. As Brindon approached he could see that the cave was a deep one and that there was a horse tethered at the far end, its nose in a nosebag. "May I tether my horse at the back?" Brindon asked. The figure nodded again and he led Longshanks into the cave. It was roomier than it first appeared and also drier. Someone had hammered spikes into the rock face at the back at some point and then attached metal rings to tether horses, and he chose the one furthest away from the other horse. He unsaddled Longshanks and then pulled out a blanket and rubbed him down carefully, before hanging up the wet blanket over two of the rings on the wall. Then he pulled out the old familiar horse blanket, draped it over Longshanks, clinched it just tight enough, and then watered and fed him. And all the time he could feel the eyes of the other man on his back. Finally finished he shouldered his saddlebags and then strode over to the fire, where he sat to one side of his suspicious fellow traveler. Reaching into one of his bags he pulled out a piece of clean cloth which was wrapped around the fresh bread that he'd bought that morning from the inn he'd stayed at. He pulled a piece off it, sprinkled some salt onto it from a little pouch that he always carried, broke the bread in half again and then handed it over to the other man. "Bread and salt," he said, before eating it. "Bread and salt," said the other man, and then ate his piece. There was something odd about his voice. The accent hinted at the Stormlands and the voice seemed growly, but as if it was being projected lower than was usual. "Thank you." And then the other man turned to look at the fire. Brindon nodded slightly and then dug into his bag again, before finally pulling out a wrapped pack of cold but cooked sausages. He then pulled out his old campaign skewer, with its wooden handle, fastened a pair of sausages on the tines and then held the skewer just above the nearest flames. The other figure watched in silence and then dug into the bag next to him and pulled out a small stone jar, which he opened and placed to one side. Brindon looked into it. "Mustard." He nodded. "A trade then. A sausage for some mustard." The other man nodded and then sniffed as the smell of hot sausage started to grow. Brindon watched them critically and then pulled back the skewer before they had a chance to burn. The other man nodded and then teased one of them off with a small knife that he had pulled from the bag. A little mustard was applied from the jar and then Brindon bit into his. Not bad. His flask contained some watered wine and he took a pull on it before placing another 2 sausages on the skewer and then putting the rest away. They'd last until tomorrow. Then he warmed the sausages whilst thinking about the other man. Whoever he was not keen on showing his face. The cloak was good quality, the gloves too. From what he could see of the sword it too was well made. And the gelding back there was fit, well cared for and might have had a splash of Dornish blood in it. But whoever he was he seemed keen to hide his face. Who was he? The other 2 sausages were eaten and then he replaced everything in his bag. Thunder rumbled in the distance and he looked out at the night. "I'm glad I'm not out there tonight." There was a grunt in answer. There was also a whinny from the back of the cave and he sighed. If the storm got any closer then he'd have to see to Longshanks. That horse got skittish when it thundered too much and would need soothing. He looked back at the fire and then thought. The question of where in the name of the gods he was going was nagging at him again. Was this all a fool's folly on his part? He had given up being Knight of the Gate, and for what? A fancy, a restlessness he could not explain, a need to be somewhere than he was right now. The thunder growled again, louder, and he sighed and then stood. "My horse hates thunder," he muttered, and then stalked back to Longshanks. The horse whickered at him and he stroked his nose and soothed him, as if he needed reminding that his master was still in the area. He'd be fine now. He stalked back to the fire and sat. The rain was pounding down outside now. Longshanks gets nervous at thunder. He'll be fine now. The head of the figure jerked up at that. "Longshanks. Ah. I had thought I had seen you before once, from a distance. You are the Blackfish." That voice was intriguing him now. It was low-pitched but was a little higher than before. He peered at the figure. "I am Sir Brynden Tully. The Knight of the Gate." There was some admiration there. And then he had it. He was a she. "I was. I am not now." She tilted her head and he saw a flash of bright blue eyes. "Why not?" He stroked his beard carefully as he thought of his answer. "I was called away. Am still called away. By something I cannot explain. I am following a pull to the southwest." He smiled awkwardly. "That sounds foolish, I know. But it nags at me. Especially the words from a dream." The woman had straightened as he had been speaking and she now pulled her hood down and stared at him in what looked like some astonishment. She was not a pretty and could be described as homely at best, with short, straw-colored hair, a wide mouth and a nose that seemed to have been broken at least twice. But her eyes. Now there was something to behold. Large and blue and with something that seemed to blaze in them. She reminded him of someone, but he could not put his finger on who. "You are pulled southwest. On this road. Since when?" "A month at least since I heard the call." He peered at her sharply. "You too?" "It was a dream in the night. I was traveling home from business for my father in the Vale when I heard a whisper and then a pull towards something that I cannot explain." "Southwest?" "Then perhaps we should travel together." He paused. "I saw 2 dead bandits on the road some miles back there." She snorted. "Fools who saw a woman on a horse and did not think that I could defend myself. I corrected their mistake. As was right." She eyed him again. "I will ride with you, Blackfish. I am Brian of Tarth." "Well met, Brian of Tarth." He paused. "I have met your father, the Even Star. A good man. He is. Taught me all he knew." Brynden smiled and then nodded. "Do you want to take the first watch or the second?" "The first." "Then good night and wake me for the second." And then he wrapped himself in his cloak, laid his head on a saddlebag and fell asleep in an instant. John are in. The figures were cold and bleak and they told a terrible story. And there were so many of them. He sighed at the thought of what they entailed and then rubbed at his forehead. He could feel a headache start to build. Ah well, he'd live. There was far, far too much to do. Fingers drummed for a moment on the desk and he looked over to see that Stannis had finished his own perusal of the latest book that had emerged from the secret stash of such books in the possession of the late and thoroughly unlamented Petter Baelish. Drowning was too good for him, Stannis said in a voice that was tight with fury. He deserved more than that. I know, Jon said with a sigh. But he is dead enough. Now we must clear the rubble and build anew. He stood with a slight wince as various bones protested and then walked to the nearest window and stared out at the morning sun. A tap at the door and Quill poked his head in. Your pardon, my lords, but Janos Slynt is here as you ordered. And I have the forms that you also asked for. Excellent. Thank you, Quill. Please keep an ear out in case we need those forms. Hopefully they wouldn't. Slynt was a fool and a coward. The man himself stamped in, looking as always like a plump fool who knew everything. Hey. Not today. Ah, Slynt, Jon said as he returned to his desk and then looked at the commander of the Gold Cloaks. Are you well? Slynt, who looked rather more like a frog of late than before, blinked at him. He seemed a little nervous. Ah, yes, my lord Hand. You have seemed unsettled these past few days. Slynt swallowed convulsively. I have. I mean no, my lord Hand. John leant back in his seat and looked at the commander of the city watch again. He seemed to be sweating a little. Good. A shame that your men were unable to find Baelish when I asked them to. As you know, I had to rely on my own man. I am sure that we would have caught him, my lord. Hand Baelish mumbled as the sheen of sweat grew a little. We searched most diligently. Yes, said Stannis darkly, I am sure that you did. Slynt made a ghastly attempt at a smile and then, as a silence fell, he twitched a little. Why did you summon me, my lord Hand? John looked about the room as if he had forgotten, and then he leant forwards a little and pointed at the book in front of him, with all its damning numbers. Do you know what this is, Slynt? No, my lord Hand. It is one of the many secret account books owned by the thief and traitor Baelish. It is the one in which he recorded certain payments. Slynt looked even sweatier than he had before. Payments for what, my lord Hand? Bribes. John said the word in a voice as cold as he could make it. Bribes to merchants. Bribes to officials. And bribes to members of the city watch. Bribes to gold cloaks. Slynt paled but then swallowed and objected. Lies. Everything that Littlefinger wrote there is naught but lies. The man was notorious for his attempts to bribe my brave men but I took not a penny from him. The words sounded brave but the sweat dripping off him told of fear. Stannis gazed at him scornfully. Have we mentioned you? Odd that the moment we mention bribes to gold cloaks you immediately protest that you are innocent. Most odd that. Unless of course you have a guilty conscience. He looked the man up and down and then sneered. Or indeed that you even know what a conscience is. The commander of the gold cloaks licked his lips nervously and then his eyes flickered from John to Stannis and then back to John. The words "I am trying to think of a plausible lie" might have been written across his face. But John cut him off. Be silent. Your guilt is written here, plain to see for all. Bribe after bribe after bribe. Small ones at first, but then larger and larger as the years went by. And not just you, there is evidence here of a spreading web of corruption. The officers under you, how much did Baelish pay you to look the other way whilst you bribed them as well? And the others under them? How much coin have you been raking in from all over the place? His finger jabbed down. Did you know that Baelish left notes about what he paid you for? No. How about this 50 dragons for Slynt on the matter of the son of Lord Tywald? I remember that. The wretched little piece of filth raped 3 women here in King's Landing and yet somehow none of them lived long enough to identify the boy in front of me. They all had their throats cut and I had to dismiss the matter, much to my anger. And now I find that you had a hand in it. I care not a jot that the boy later died when he was stabbed in the groin by another woman, and in fact I would reward that woman if I knew who she was. You conspired with Baelish and Tywald to hide the truth. Slynt was as white as a sheet now, his fingers opening and closing convulsively at his sides. He was also shaking a little and there was a suspicion of something in the air that made John suspect that bladder control was becoming an issue for him. And the list continues. Not merely bribes, but crimes as well. Perjury. Murder in places. Slynt made a noise of protest but John again cut him off. Yes, murder. Did you think that it can be seen in any other way? Men bribed to look the other way whilst innocent people were disposed of by guilty men. Other men paid to lie to cover up the crimes of others. And all of this resulting in a steady stream of coin flowing in your direction, until it became a river. Lies. Squealed Slynt, very pale now. All falsehoods and lies. Liar. John roared. You didn't even bother hiding the gold. And more than the gold. Baelish paid you in property as well. 3 businesses that you had long coveted and which he was obliging enough to help drive out of business so you could appropriate them. And you were too stupid to pass them on to anyone else, but instead you kept them for yourself. Thanks to you and Baelish, the gold cloaks are little more than another gang in this city. Gold cloaks. Midden cloaks more like. You've dragged your cloak through the filth and enough of it has finally stuck to you. He leant back and stared at Slynt. The wretched man had one hand on the pommel of his sword now and he looked as if he was a hairbreadth away from drawing it. If you draw that sword, Stannis grunted, you'll be dead before the tips clears the scabbard. I promise you that, Slynt. I've killed a lot of men. Reachman. Targaryen loyalists. Ironborn. Pirates. I'm not like the scum you confront. Whenever someone like you can be bothered to confront actual criminals, I can gut you like a fish where you stand. I promise it. Slynt eyed him like a cornered animal, and then Stannis did something that unnerved the Gold Cloak almost as much as it unnerved Jon. He smiled slightly at him. It looked a bit like a death rictus, but it was a smile. The Gold Cloak made a whimpering noise, and Jon made a note to get someone scrub the spot where he was standing. Yes, there was a small puddle there. And then Slynt lifted a shaking hand off the pommel and tried to say something. All that emerged was another whimper. Quill. Jon shouted, and the door flew open to reveal Quill and two other men in full armor and holding drawn swords. My lord Hand. This man is under arrest, on charges of corruption. Strip of his weapons, his armor, and above all the cloak that he has disgraced. My lord Hand, Quill said tersely as he removed Slynt's sword and dagger, grimacing a little at the puddle. And then. The black cells. The king will work out what to do with him. Slynt made another noise of distress, but allowed himself to be led away by the grim-faced guards. Jon watched them all go and then nodded as a servant darted in with a bucket to scrub the puddle away, before leaving, closing the door as he went. What will you do with the gold cloaks now? Stannis asked. I know not. Their upper ranks are as corrupt as Slynt. Takers of bribes, and that might be the least of their crimes. He ran a hand over his face. I think that the worst of them will have to go to the wall. I can't send them all though, that will leave the city in a parlous state. Stannis thought about this, looking about as grim as he could ever remember seeing him. I see your point. Much as I would dismiss every guilty man, that would gut the city watch almost completely. We know out the worst and then make the lower ones redeem themselves. Review them regularly. Who will you appoint in their place? I know not that either. We need a man who can lead and not be corrupted. If he was not so vital to you, I would suggest Sir Davos Seaworth as a temporary replacement. Or can you spare him? Stannis ground his teeth a little and then nodded. He would do at a pinch. It would be a bad blow to lose him even for a month, but I could just spare him for a while. Jon sighed and then stepped closer to Stannis and lowered his voice down to a whisper. We need more reliable men than we have. Especially as this business of the king's great matter must be resolved, and soon. The Queen has already sent me a list of men that she thinks would be suitable to be the new master of coin. Not one of them is acceptable to me. Lannisters or men close to her father. Both, and a number who would merely bind themselves closer to her in the hope of a future reward. I have no doubt that once she hears that the gold cloaks need to be placed in order, she will volunteer the services of a large number of Lannister guards and then suggest some replacements for Slynt. Then we shall have to preempt her. I can bring in men from Dragonstone, just as you can from the Vale. Reliable men. When we finally move, we need to control the city, and the gold cloaks are the key to it. He looked annoyed. This makes things complicated. We cannot move until the ground beneath our feet is certain again. And at the moment, what with Baelish and now Slynt, well, things are in flux. He stared out of the window. More in flux perhaps than I first thought. This business with the Great September and the tales of people looking to the north. Well, I need to send a raven to Winterfell to meet with Ned Stark as soon as possible. He saw Stannis pull a face and he nodded. I know, more delay. But something that I cannot explain is happening. In the meantime we must do what we can with the tools that we have. Send me Seaworth when you can spare him today. He'll need to clean out the headquarters of the gold cloaks with some reliable men as well. I'll send him when I can. Do you really mean to leave the decision of what to do with Slynt to Robert? I thought that you would send him to the wall. Jon pulled a face of his own. I do not think that my good brother would thank me for sending the most corrupt man still remaining in King's Landing to the wall. For one thing, he might try and sell it to the wildlings. For another, he might leave a trail of piss and slime all over it. I jest, but he's a bad bargain even for the wall. True enough. There was a formal knock at the door and they both turned to face. Enter. Quill entered. My lords, a signal from the harbour, from Sir Davos Seaworth. The king's ship is in sight. Jaime. He was in a dark mood as he rode down to the docks behind the Hand and Old Stone Face. The encounter with Dawn the other day had stirred a lot of memories that he'd worked very hard to try and repress. Memories of his youth. Memories of his first days in the Kingsguard. He'd worshipped some of those men at first. Arthur Dane had been his ideal as a knight. What could be said about Barristan the Bold, except high praise? Jonnet Hordiari. Lewin Martell. Names that had made him tongue-tied and nervous. And then of course old Gerald Hightower, the White Bull himself. That admiration had died on the same day that the Starks had. Died in fire and blood and screaming, in a throne room filled with deathly silent men and women, watching white-faced as a terrible crime was committed that eventually destroyed the Targaryen dynasty. You swore a vow to guard the king, not to judge him. Hightower's words. Words he must have known were hollow and worthless. They had both known that Aerys was then far beyond mad. His cackling glee at the agonies of both Starks was more than proof of that. But he was in the Kingsguard now. And effectively a hostage. So he had turned his pride in his white cloak into something else. Duty. And then again into a careful watchfulness. Especially after the death of Elia and the children, after all he had done to save them. And now here he was, Kingsguard to the Fat King, a man who had let himself go at such a pace that it still astonished him at times. He sometimes wondered why Robert Baratheon had wasted himself in the way that he had, before shrugging and deciding that he didn't care anymore. He shook himself slightly as they arrived at the docks and he repressed a more recent memory. The feel of Dawn twisting in his grip like a snake trying to get away. What had that been about? He had thought about approaching young Lord Dane and asking him, before he and Dondarrion left for the north in a day or so, but for once in his life his nerve had failed him. The sound of a growing crowd brought him back to where he was. The ship was approaching, slowly creeping next to the docks. It looked like all ships did to him, although if Seaworth was here he could probably tell him where it had come from. He put on his best beaming smile for the crowd and dismounted. He filtered out what they were saying about him. He didn't care. And then he saw the king and frowned. Robert Baratheon was prowling around the deck like a caged wolf, waiting for the ship to dock. When it did he stood by a stanchion and drummed his fingers on it as the gangplank was maneuvered into place. And when it was, he at last stormed down it, with Barristan Selmy behind him and Renly Baratheon behind him in turn. He did his best not to blink in surprise. The Fat King had changed. He was still fat, but he was thinner than he had been when he had left. And there were other differences. He was clean-shaven now, with his hair also cut to half its length. And he blazed with energy, as if he had finally rediscovered some vital wellspring within himself. Oh, and then there was the massive sword that was strapped to his back. It looked old and ancient and dangerous in a way that he couldn't put his finger on. Jon! Baratheon shouted as he strode rapidly forwards, before clasping hands with a clearly startled Jon Arryn. Good to see you again. Where's my horse? That one. Right. The Red Keep and bloody fast. We have a lot to do. And then he leapt on the proffered horse and spurred it into a fast trot up the hill, accelerating to a gallop in places as Selmy and Renly Baratheon took their places at his side. Jaime and the other mounted as fast as they could, and as Jaime galloped up the hill he wondered what in the name of the seven hells was going on. In the end he did catch up with them. Sadly not through great horsemanship, but rather because they had stopped to stare at the head of the late Petyr Baelish. Jon! Robert Baratheon called out. Yes, your grace. Arryn panted as he reined in. Why is the head of my master of coin looking down at me from a spike? He was stealing from you, your grace. A dark flush stole over the back of the big man's neck and then he spurred his horse again, trotting quickly into the Red Keep. When they reached the main courtyard he dismounted. As Jaime also dismounted he got a better look at the sword. It was very old indeed. I see that you have a new sword, your grace, he called out. Well, so to speak. Robert Baratheon turned on his heel and in doing so loomed over Jaime slightly, and for a moment, just a moment, Jaime seemed to see the demon of the trident in front of him. And then Baratheon smiled and the spell was broken. He reached back and slapped the hilt of the sword. Found this at Storm's End. The sword of my ancestors, the sword of the Durandons. It was waiting for me in the Durandon tombs there. There was a scoffing noise. Durandon tombs. At Storm's End. What nonsense is this? Stannis Baratheon did not look as if he believed a word of what his brother had just said. Oddly enough, instead of being angry at the scathing tone used by his younger brother, Robert just looked steadily at him. It was at the end of the long passage, brother, under where the godswood used to be. It was young Edric who spotted that the stones at the end of the passage were mortared together, but the walls laid stone on stone. We took down the mortared stones and discovered that the passage led to the tombs. Stannis listened to this with a scowl and then what Jaime thought might have been the beginning of facial tic. Truly. Truly, Lord Stannis Barristan Selmy said gravely as he approached from one side. I was there, along with Lord Renly. And within, he seemed to shake his head in bewilderment. There was a statue, the Fat King said solemnly. And it was holding this sword here. I approached it and, the eyes opened. Magic, Stannis, it was magic. The eyes burned with red fire. Storm King, it called me and then it gave me the sword and told me to go north. Next bit's a bit hazy as I think I fell over, but when I came to I was holding the sword. Jon looked into the records and the inscriptions. Do you know what this is, Stannis, Jon? Stormbreaker. There was a long silence. It was broken by Robert Baratheon clapping his two hands together. Right. Littlefinger's dead, after stealing from me you say. So what else has happened? And then they passed into the Red Keep as Arryn talked quietly to Baratheon. Jaime watched everyone go silently. He had the oddest feeling that the world was changing before his very eyes. Robert. Much to his surprise, Jon and Stannis did not take him to any room that he had seen before. Instead they seemed to wander until they found a smallish room without window and with a chimney that received a great deal of attention from the other two. Renly had wandered off somewhere and Selmy stood guard outside. I take it that I'm about to hear bad news for my ears only. He saw Jon nod and he sighed. Right then. If you're both satisfied with this room, would you mind telling me why you're so worried about eavesdroppers and then what the bloody hell happened with Baelish? This place is a warren, your grace, Jon admitted. And there are far too many places for people to overhear things. I think that we never realized how paranoid the dragons were. As for Baelish, he was indeed stealing from you. Stealing on a scale that still beggars belief. As master of coin he had every chance to divert coin. He even stole from loans made by Tywin Lannister. And also the Iron Bank. This rocked him back on his heels. Aho! Ambitious of the bastard. He thought about and then flushed a little. Damn it. I always scorned counting coppers. I should have listened to you, Jon. So how bad is it? Not as bad as I first feared. Ironically, he was using the coin he stole to buy buildings and set up legal businesses. Because he often used further stolen coin to make improvements to those places, he increased their value. And because we found all of Baelish's accounts and records, we now own those properties and businesses. Robert stared at the man and then threw his head back and roared with laughter. Oh, very nice. Ironic. I take it we can sell them. Aye, if need be. And we also found all the money he'd squirreled away in Essos. The Iron Bank is happier with us now and Tywin Lannister is being sent the details of what Baelish owned in the Westerlands. 'Tis a goodly amount. That was good. But then Robert stared at the other two. There's something else, isn't there? What else was Baelish up to? Stannis stepped forwards. Sir Davos Seaworth was taking young Robert Arryn north to White Harbour, so that he could travel to Winterfell and foster with Ned. I remember talk of that. It's a good idea. I've sent Edric there myself. Well, one of the crew was a ne'er-do-well, hired by Baelish. His instructions were to kill Ned's man Castle, set a fire on the ship, and then flee with Robert Arryn. What? Kidnap your son? Why? We do not yet know, not truly, Jon broke in. Some scheme of Baelish, from his twisted mind. And, there was another plot. It seems that someone has been poisoning young Robert. He is free of it now. But, there is some reason to believe that Baelish gave my wife the poison by pretending that it was some kind of medicine. Various tendons crackled as Robert clenched his fists. Baelish was poisoning my young namesake. It's a good thing you killed him before I arrived. I would have used Stormbreaker to chop his fucking head off. He glared at them both. Right. Now what else? The mountain clans of the Vale have vanished. He stared at Jon as if he was raving mad. What? I'm afraid you heard me, Your Grace. They appeared before the Bloody Gate and told the Blackfish that they were going to fight the others in the north. And then they vanished. No one's seen them since. The others? In the north? Aye. And then the Blackwoods and the Brackens called a truce and have sworn a great oath to keep that truce as they need to, fight the others. He knew it. Something had indeed changed, war was indeed in the air. But the others? They were a legend. Weren't they? Then a further thought struck him. Stormbreaker was supposed to be a legend too, yet it was now at his back. What else? The statues of the seven in the Great September have all changed and are now pointing north. The Septons are in an uproar over this apparent miracle. And things are unsettled as a result. Different interpretations are flying around. He sat down at this. Gods, but I hate religion, he muttered, running a hand over his face. Right. We need to see Ned as soon as possible, and we also need to lance this religious boil. For the first part I was going to call him south to Riverrun, or even Moat Cailin, to talk about all of this business about mention of the others. For the second part, I do not know. There is a final thing, Your Grace. Go on. Baelish was bribing the gold cloaks. Janos Slynt was far more corrupt than we had ever feared. In fact, the entire higher ranks of the gold cloaks must be sent to the wall. They have all failed spectacularly. He scowled. Gods, I knew the man was bad, but truly that bad. Worse if anything. We have all of Baelish's secret account books. It's all in black and white. Slynt was paid to look the other way in cases of assault, rape and even murder. Rage filled him. He was he? Very well. Ned always says that the man who sets the punishment must also swing the sword. I shall damn well do so. Stormbreaker will taste blood again. He paused. And I need to spar, before and perhaps even after that. Got too much damn fat on me. If a war is coming, I'll greet it as close as I can get to how I was at the Trident. The other two gaped at him a little and then they nodded. Brother Stannis said after a long moment, what happened to you? This was a good question, and he paused at the door. I have a purpose again. And then he swept out down the corridor, Selmy at his side. He needed to spar. War was coming. Ned. He ate his breakfast in his solar that morning. He had a lot to think about, and as he ate he looked at the map as the plans and, well, he brooded. There was so much to do, and he was starting to wonder about how much time he had left to do it. The others had to be aware that he knew that they had awoken, that the North and the First Men had become aware of the threat. But there were still the other threats in the south and to the southwest that had to be dealt with. The Ironborn concerned him. He had been quietly investigating what was going on down there, and what he was starting to see was deeply worrying. Balon Greyjoy had been rebuilding his fleet under his bloody nose. How? He had his suspicions. Too many parts of the western shores of the north were barren and had few settlements, so it would have been easy to sneak their longships in and harvest timber without anyone knowing. He had thought that he had been keeping a good eye on them. He had been wrong. At least Howland had sent men to garrison Moat Cailin and to restore the more easily repaired parts. He had sent ravens to order more men and supplies there. At the very least it could be a waypoint for any forces coming from the south. At worst it could be held against the Ironborn should they be stupid enough to attack. There were times, in his darker moments, when he wondered if Stannis Baratheon had been right about the Iron Islands. Balon Greyjoy should have been removed from power and his head placed upon a spike, and someone better, someone smarter, placed in charge. The Reader perhaps, or even one of the Lesser Lords. It would have freed up Theon from the poisoned chalice that would one day await him as the Lord of the Iron Islands. Theon was a different man now. He wasn't a boy. He was grave and thought a great deal before he spoke about weighty matters, and he prayed every day in the God's wood. And he was teaching Bran archery. The lad had a gift for teaching, something that he had shown no signs of before. His gaze wandered south to the Westerlands and his lips tightened for a moment. The old lion was another threat. A proud man and a man who did not like to be proved wrong about anything. Did he suspect that his grandchildren were not the progeny of Robert Baratheon? If so, did he care? Or was he too set on having Joffrey take his seat on that damn Iron Throne? And who to the south knew about the others? Whose ears had heard the call? He wondered. Word had come from Lord Marndale that a shipload of men and supplies had arrived from the Stormlands, bound for Eastwatch by the sea. Volunteers for the war, they had told the rather startled lord of the city. Moreover, volunteers with swords, timber, food and coin. Did Renly Baratheon know about them? Did Robert? How far south had the call gone? The door creaked a little and he looked to see that Cat had entered and was looking at him fondly. "Good morning, my love," she said with a smile. "Breakfast in your solar? Arya was asking after you." He smiled at her and then gestured at the map. "Too much thinking to do," he sighed. "Too much needs to be done." She closed the door behind her and then walked over and sat in the chair next to him and looked at the map. "So much relies on us, doesn't it?" "Aye," he said wryly. "So very much. We need to watch the north but also make sure that the things that happened in the south don't vex us. What Robb saw is invaluable. We know that Balon Greyjoy is eyeing the north in revenge for his defeat now. We know that the Lannisters will fight to support Joffrey should he ever become king. And we know that Robert and Jon are in danger. Oh, and we also know that Renly's a fool." He shook his head. "If only I'd known what I know now when I'd gone south to King's Landing in that other future." Cat turned a little pale. "I do not like to think about that future," she said faintly. "You dead, Robb trying his best to fight a war, Sansa a prisoner, Arya missing, Bran unable to walk, our home here lost." He was on his feet in an instant, crouching next to her. "It will not happen now, Cat. We've seen to that. The north is mobilizing for the long night and the south is starting to respond. We need to talk to Robert, and right soon, but what happened in that other future will not happen again." He smiled at her and then kissed her gently on the lips. "I swear it. It will not happen, that future saw." Cat smiled a little tremulously at him. Then she sighed. "Ned, the vault we found. Do you really think that they were Starks who were also wargs?" "I do," he said softly. "Lewin has been translating the runes on the tombs. They were wargs. Then what are the chances that any of our children are wargs? Or you, or Benjen? Ah. And that was something that he was wondering himself. Cat, I don't know. I wish I could tell you that I knew, but that would be a lie. When the direwolves are born, well, we will have to see what happens. The fact that the mother is here and seems so compliant is, well, astonishing. Cat, I know that much of this must be alien to you and I am sorry. But this is something that is buried deep in the history of my family. I barely understand it myself, and I am supposed to be the Stark in Winterfell." He shook his head. "But this is something that is a part of me and our children. The old gods have spoken. I know that you worship the Seven, and they must their own role to play, but this is the North, Cat. The old gods have given us a second chance and we must take it." She smiled at him again. "I know it. Ned. I saw Lewin this morning. I wanted him to confirm something. I am with child again." He stared at her, his heart soaring within him. "Truly? Truly?" He whooped with joy and hugged her, before fearing that he was being too rough with her. "I am sorry, I shouldn't have done that. The baby is not due for some time and I am not made from glass, Ned." Cat's eyes were warm and amused and also contained a challenge. Another child, yet another departure from the future that Robb saw. With every step away from that we tread a new path. And that both reassures me and frightens me, Cat. We have gone from one war with rules that we understand to another war that was last fought by our ancestors and with rules that are clouded by time. He caught her look of sudden understanding. We face an enemy that we have never fought before, with powers that we do not understand. An enemy that can make the dead walk. I have ordered the walls of Winterfell checked for any damage, I have ordered that the broken tower be inspected for repair, and I have a plan for that anyway. She looked at him sharply, but at that moment someone knocked at the door. Who is it? Ned called. Lewin, my lord. I have messages. Come in. Ned sighed as he stood and watched as the maester bustled in. Who are they from? A raven from Dragonstone first, my lord, Lewin said as he handed it over. From his grace the king. Ned felt his eyebrows fly upwards. What was Robert doing in Dragonstone? Then he looked at the message, and if his eyebrows could have gone up any further then they would have. Ned, am writing in haste from Dragonstone, travelling from Storm's End to King's Landing. Have found the sword of the Durandons in Storm's End. I'm sending my son Edric to foster with you at Winterfell. Treat him right, please, he's a good lad. There's a storm coming. Don't know what or where, but stand ready. Robert, King, etc., etc. He lowered the letter and felt a fierce exultation fill his heart. Robert's Durandon blood sings true. Although where he found the sword of Durangot's grief is a mystery to me. He paused. And he's sending his bastard son Edric here. We will have to keep an eye on him, Cat sighed. And given what we know about Joffrey's true parentage, it will be more important than ever to keep him alive. Cersei Lannister will not take it kindly either. I care not a whit for what Cersei Lannister thinks of us. I trust her about as much I trusted Aerys Targaryen not at all. She is dangerous and false. The problem is that Robert is not aware of her true nature. We must deal with her at some point and defang her brother and their father at the same time. He looked up and saw that the other two were staring at him. I have given this matter some thought. In the meantime you have another message for me, Lewin. I, my lord, the older man said with a slight shake of his shoulders as he seemed to settle himself. From the Red Fort, in reply from your message. And he held out a thick package. Ned took it and opened it. Inside was a sheath of papers, secured with a ribbon with a wax seal, with the personal seal of Lord Redfort pressed into it. Ah! The answer to my letter. Thank you, Lewin. Cat, we have some reading to do. We might soon know the answer to the question of if Domeric's suit to marry our daughter can be granted or denied. Willers. He came awake slowly. He felt hungry, and so very, very, thirsty. He also felt weak, as if he had been ill. He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. He was, in his bed. How had he gotten there? Why was his head so fuzzy? Then he frowned. His leg didn't hurt. How odd. Licking his lips made him realize how dry and cracked they were, and he sat up slowly. As he did, he realized that he was not alone. Margaery was asleep in a chair next to his bed, and by the main window that looked out over Highgarden grandmother was embroidering with a skull on her face. What happened? He croaked through a throat that seemed drier than the bone road. Grandmother looked up from her embroidery. Aha, she said caustically. The sleeper awakens. Margaery came awake abruptly. Her hair looked disheveled and her eyes were red, making him think that she had been crying. Willers. You're awake. I need a drink, he croaked, looking around. Then he saw a goblet to one side and reached out with a shaking hand. He very nearly dropped it, but Margaery took it from him and then brought it to his lips. He wanted to scold her for treating him like a child, but at the very sight of what looked like watered wine he desired nothing more than to drink every drop within. He almost choked on it at first, but by all the gods it felt good to drink it. And he did drink every drop. Is there any food in here? The question came out in an almost normal voice, and at the very thought of food his stomach growled. Here, grandmother said as she crossed the room, clutching a plate of what looked like honeycakes in one hand whilst her cane clacked on the floor. Eat these. She placed the tray on the bed in front of him and then pulled up a chair as he grabbed one and ate it in 2 bites. You seem yourself again. Good. Willers grabbed the second honeycake and then peered at her. What do you mean? Grandmother leant back in her chair and then eyed him critically. You've been asleep for some time, boy. And this has not been the first time that you've woken up since you found that room with the statue. The room with the statue, he cast his mind back. Garth Greenhand. Garth Greenhand. in a room that no one had ever known of. But you found it. He frowned again and then ran a hand over his beard. It all seems fuzzy. Indistinct. Then he frowned at her again. What did you mean? That wasn't the first time I'd been awake. The last thing I remember is being in that room. Grandmother swapped a look with Margary. His sister looked worried. His grandmother looked slightly puzzled. Willers, Marjorie said hesitantly, 2 days after you collapsed you woke up, shouting orders. Orders to men long dead. You sounded as if you were ordering men whilst in battle, grandmother said quietly. And the names you were shouting, well, they were to the sons of Mern the Ninth. You seemed to be on the field of fire. You seemed very distressed, shouted something about dragons, drank 2 cups of wine, ate a plate of food and then fell asleep again. Oh, and you pinched the bottom of the maid who brought you your food. He stared at her, baffled. I did. Oh yes. With hindsight, it was almost amusing. And then 7 days after that you awoke again, used the privy, dictated 3 letters to men long since dead, including Lauren Lannister, about mobilizing men against Aegon Targaryen, ate 3 honeycakes and drank a goblet of watered wine, pinched the bottom of the same maid and then collapsed. She leant forwards. So, as you can imagine, I am very happy to see you in your right mind again. He eyed her bemusedly as he swallowed the last of the honeycakes. I don't understand. Willers, Margary said tearfully, we thought that you would never wake up again. He looked at her and smiled. And yet I have. He paused. I feel as weak as a newborn kitten though. You are awake at least, which is good. And apparently in your right mind. The Maester was worried. As was I. I told you not to worry yourself, child, grandmother harumphed. I always thought that your brother would awake. That Maester is an Inaihammer. Margary looked at her. Grandmother, you were worried too. I was not. I never worry. I muse. His sister shot him an amused look and then reached out and grabbed grandmother's embroidery. Then explain this. She passed it over to Willers, who looked at it and then snorted with amusement. Grandmother had embroidered a picture of a man in Maester's robes being chased by an angry thorn bush. You were worried. Grandmother snatched it back. I may have been slightly concerned. Now how do you feel? Willers considered this question carefully. His stomach no longer felt as if it had a kitten loose in it. Still weak, but no longer as hungry. And my leg no longer hurts. Try standing. It wasn't a request from grandmother, it was more like a command. He blinked at her and then moved to the end of the bed. Pulling the sheets aside he could see that he had been dressed in a robe, that preserved his modesty, and then he stared at his leg. His bad leg. Which no longer looked as if the bone had been broken and reset. It looked fine. It didn't hurt. He slowly stood. Tested his weight a little and then took a cautious step forwards. He was weak and wobbly on his feet, but his leg didn't hurt at all. It doesn't hurt, he whispered. It really doesn't. He looked around at the other 2 and saw their sudden smiles. Then he remembered the statue. I need my clothes. I have to see what I discovered. Good, grandmother muttered. You can make better sense of it than your fat fool of a father. She sounded even more acerbic than she usually did when talking about father, and Willers looked at Margary, who pulled a slight face in response. Grandmother, naturally, noticed this. Oh, stop that. I gave birth to him and I have every right to call him an idiot. How any child of mine could have the brains of a piece of wood is beyond me. Your father has not reacted well to that room. He's been going around telling people that he always suspected that there was something there in order to make himself appear less clueless. He's almost ordered it bricked up 3 times. Willers frowned as he walked over to his dressing screen and then pulled off his robe. Why? Because he's afraid of what it represents. It's a symbol of the Gardener Kings, and your father never forgets that House Tyrell were merely the stewards of Highgarden and not the kings of it. You have the blood of the Gardeners in your veins, children, but there are others who claim that their claim is stronger. The Florents, Rowans, and Oakhurts. And all have sent messages to your fool of a father in the wake of the finding of that statue. He thinks that this is all some new gambit of the Game of Thrones, or the Reach's equivalent. Games that he is truly terrible at playing. She paused. Are you getting dressed, boy? I think he said deliberately after sniffing at himself, that I need to bathe first. I smell. He did indeed, and he put his robe back on and ordered a bath to be drawn at once, whilst a clearly much happier Margary and grandmother vanished outside. As he waited he drank another cup of watered wine and ate a plate of bread and ham that he ordered. He noticed that the maid who brought the food eyed him carefully with a suspicion of a blush, and he wondered if that was the maid that grandmother had mentioned. It seemed that even possessed he had good taste, and he smiled warmly at her and saw the blush grow more than a little. The bath did him a lot of good, and he dressed quickly afterwards and strode out. It was odd to walk without a cane for the first time in years, and he found the hand that usually grasped it feel oddly empty. Perhaps he should start wearing a sword again. Grandmother was sitting on a bench outside, basking in the sun, and as he approached she looked at him. So she said eventually, "Want to see what mischief you have wrought?" He looked at her. Yes. A simple, short answer, but all that needed to be said on this. She looked at him almost approvingly. And then she took him to the room. There was the statue that he so dimly remembered, and the little stream that now bubbled cheerfully up and out of the room. Someone had left fresh flowers at the foot of the stone figure, and he peered at the face of his distant ancestor. Garth Greenhand. There were other statues of him elsewhere in Highgarden, but this one seemed different. Clearer, somehow. Make the garden bloom again, what does that mean? Grandmother shrugged. I know not. But many want to talk to you about what it could mean. Your father wants to ignore the whole thing. No, Willers snapped abruptly. We cannot. This means something. And, what help needs to be sent to Winterfell? You remember that part, do you? Good. Grandmother most assuredly sounded approving now. No cheese in your ears or in your brain, unlike your fool of a father. He thought hard. There was no shame in admitting that he needed more information. We need to access the archives, grandmother, see what the Gardener Kings used to send north, if anything. We need more information than we have at the moment. And this is not a matter that can be dismissed. This is not a gambit in the Game of Thrones, nor a conspiracy by the other houses. This is a relic of the past with a message for us. Your father will disagree and tell you that it's all mummery. He felt his expression harden into something that looked rather like the look on grandmother's face at the moment. Father is wrong. Grandmother smiled at him. I taught you well. Chapter 11. Chapter text. Ned. He stared at the map again as he waited for Cat to bring Sansa to his solar. The letter from Lord Redfort lay on the table, and he thought about that other message that lay within it. The Redfort prepares for war, Lord Redfort had written. I am told Runestone does too. The Stark calls for aid. Command us. The call had indeed been heard south of the Neck, and he needed to work out the implications now. The Redfort and Runestone owed their allegiance to Jon as the Lord of the Eyrie and Defender of the Vale. For them to send help to the north would mean that Jon would have to be told about what was going on. There were political implications now. The sound of footsteps and the noise of the door opening dragged him away from his thoughts, and he looked over to see Cat leading his oldest daughter into the room before closing the door very firmly behind them. Sansa, be seated. I hope that we didn't tear you away from anything important. She shook her head, looking a little bewildered. I was watching Domeric give cousin Robert a riding lesson on a pony. He seemed very intent. Domeric or Robert? She smiled a little. Both. Anna was watching intently on one side and Domeric was on the other, telling Robert what to do and what to look for on the horse. Robert seemed very keen to learn. She then frowned a little. Cousin Robert seems sharper than he had been before, father. He is, I know, Ned agreed, as he placed a chair to one side for Cat, fetched his own chair and then stared intently at her. Sansa, we must talk about a very important subject. Did you know that Domeric Bolton had asked me for your hand in marriage? She turned a little pink and sat up straighter in her seat. I did know. Domeric mentioned it to me. He was very respectful and considerate, knightly in fact. Then she peered at them both. You have thought about it for some time, father. He leant back in his seat. I have. It is not a thing to be taken lightly, your future happiness. Especially as a marriage between a Stark and a Bolton would have ramifications. You know the somewhat vexed history of our two houses, do you not? Sansa stared at him and then laughed nervously. But father, that is all ancient history. He stared back at her and then passed a weary hand over his eyes. Oh, gods, he muttered, it seems I neglected your training as well. Then he looked at Kat. What nonsense has that Septa been teaching her? I will enquire, Kat replied in a cold voice and with a long-suffering look at the ceiling. And yes, we should have taught her otherwise. Mother? Sansa asked incredulously. Ned cleared his throat. Sansa, this is important. You might think that it is ancient history, but it is not. It still has relevance. I have an understanding with Roose Bolton, as I know what kind of a man he is. He secretly yearns for the old days, when his family had certain hobbies. Sansa turned white, but less white than he might have thought. Interesting. Did she suspect? And if Roose Bolton was offered a chance at supplanting us, say if I died and Robb became Lord of Winterfell, then he might try, if the opportunity presented itself. He is a cautious man, but given sufficient incentive he might cast off the mask and reveal his true face. And given the monster that was his bastard son, we have to wonder how closely that particular apple fell to the tree it grew from. So you can see that I have concerns about Domeric. Sansa had grown even paler. Father. Did Domeric tell you about his half-brother? He did. He said that if he had known half the things he now knows about him he would have ridden out and cut him down like the animal he was, even though he would have been labeled a kinslayer. Ah. That was a good point. She started to open her mouth again and he raised a hand in a gesture for her to be silent. I have heard him say something similar. When I first heard that he was coming here I wanted a chance to observe him closely. Given who his father is and given what I later heard about his half-brother, I wanted to watch him very closely indeed. He leant back in his chair again. What I have seen of him has been good. He is courteous, well-read, behaves well around the other children, and above all I have heard nothing bad about his behavior from the standpoint of the small folk and the servants. That last point is important. Her face scrunched slightly as she thought about it, but he then plowed on. Part of the reason why I have waited for us to have this conversation is the fact that I wanted to observe him. The other reason is that I was waiting for a reply to a raven I sent to Lord Redfort in the Vale, where Domeric was fostered. He sent me this today. He lifted the letter. Lord Redfort is very complimentary about Domeric, Kat said softly. And he has written a great deal about him. About how he learned to ride and then passed on those lessons to others. About he treated the servants there fairly. And how none of the small folk made a single complaint against him. The letter took us some time to read, but was very detailed. He looked at his daughter. Lord Redfort had also heard of Roose Bolton and wanted to keep an eye on him. It seems that there was no need. Domeric is not like his father. In fact, he absorbed a great deal from Lord Redfort and his sons about what it means to be knightly. Sansa smiled at that and sat even straighter. Father, she said hesitantly, Domeric and I have talked about his plans for his house. And he does have them. He told me that he will never follow the path that his ancestors followed and which he suspects that his father yearns for. And then his daughter took a deep breath. He has asked my help for something, father. The design of a new banner for his house. He has told me that when he succeeds his father he will replace the banner of the flayed man with another one. We have been discussing what would be fit. Ned stared at her and then looked at Kat, who raised an eyebrow in surprise. A new banner would fly over the dread fort. Yes, father. That was astonishing. Such a thing had not been heard of for many a long year in the north. The noble families had their banners and sigils and they stuck to those banners and sigils. For Domeric Bolton to discuss this with Sansa meant that he was more than serious, he was in deadly earnest. He stroked the tip of his nose for a long moment and then he looked at Kat, who nodded the barest tilt of her head. Sansa, should we agree to Domeric's suit then you must understand something. Marriage can be an alliance between families and more than that. It is not just a matter of providing heirs. When I married your mother I barely knew her, something I regret very much. But we forged a love that has withstood much, and I rely on her for many things. Should you marry Domeric, then there is something that you must hold to. As well as giving him children and helping to run the Dread Fort and the area around it, you must keep him to this path that he has outlined to you. Life here in the north is never easy, and there is a winter coming that will freeze many men and women down to their very bones. The long night comes, Sansa, you know it, as we all do. As does Domeric. He must never be allowed to go down the road that his father secretly yearns for. He must never produce a Ramsay Snow. Preventing that, keeping him the Domeric Bolton of the Red Fort, will be one of your tasks, should you marry him. And it will be a hard task given the war that will come. Sansa was very pale as she stared at him. So, to that matter, was Cat. He knew that his wife knew very well what he was asking their daughter to do, how important it was. Sansa, sweeterling, we would have you happy, Cat said after a moment. But we would also have you open your eyes to what a marriage with Domeric Bolton would mean. As your father said, there is the long winter coming and a war with the others. But you cannot let that distract you from your duty if you marry Domeric. Now do you need time to think about this? Sansa sat very still for a long moment, her eyes far away as she thought things through. There was a struggle visible on her face, one that she had obviously not expected to ever have to confront. No, she said eventually. I believe in Domeric. I have talked to him, considered his words. Given your views and those of Lord Redfort, I can only say again that I believe in him. Mother, father, I love him. He looked at her gravely and then at Cat, who raised her eyebrows at him and then lowered them when he nodded seriously at her. Very well, he said with a slight smile, I shall tell Domeric that we look favorably upon his suit. And then Ned felt the smile slip from his face. Then I shall send a raven to Roose Bolton. He and I have much to discuss. Jory. The boy who had once been so pale and wrong in the head pulled on the reins and the little pony slowed to a halt, before turning in a careful walk at the gentle urgings of the boy. Only when the pony was facing the other way did he look up at the watchers. Good, said Domeric Bolton, very good indeed, Robert. You've done well. Robert Arryn beamed widely at them all, especially when Jory and Anna both smiled at him. Domeric, can I ride him a little further tomorrow? The son of the Lord of the Dread Fort appeared to think about it, his hand rubbing at his nose, but Jory could see the small smile that he was concealing under his hand. I think so. A little further every day. Your horse is important, Robert. It's getting used to you, just as you are getting used to it. You wouldn't expect to suddenly be forced to walk for 10 miles with a pack on your back, would you? Robert Arryn shook his head, his eyes suddenly very wide and thoughtful. Then he solemnly dismounted, held the reins in his hand and looked at Domeric. I had not thought of that, he said musingly, and then looked at his horse. I wish I'd had my own horse at King's Landing. Mother never let me near one. How can I get one here? You ask me or your Uncle Ned and we will get you one. Do you want that one? Jory started a little. Lady Stark could be very quiet sometimes. My lady, he said formally. Lord Robert has been practicing his riding skills. So I see, she said with a smile. I watched from afar. Robert Arryn beamed at her. Aunt Caitlin. Were you really watching me? I was. You are getting better and better. His smile got even wider, before he suddenly became more serious. I like this pony very much, Aunt Caitlin. His name is Surefoot. A good name for a horse, she said, and then looked at Jory and Domeric. Who picked him out? I did, Lady Stark, Domeric said quietly. He seemed to have the best temperament for your nephew. He's young as well. They seem a good match. Something seemed to pass between them and Lady Stark nodded slightly before turning back to Robert. Well then, as you seem to like him, would you like Surefoot to be your horse? The little boy stared up at his aunt with very wide eyes. He would be mine. Domeric squatted down to be on the same eye level as the boy. He would be yours. But you would have to take care of him. A good knight takes care of his horse. He'll rely on you for many things. Others will muck him out, but you must teach him more about riding and you must groom him. It's a great responsibility, Robert. Robert Arryn looked from Domeric to Lady Stark and then back again. And then he set his chin in a manner that made him look very like his father. Then I accept it. He sounded older than his years for a moment. He nodded almost formally. I shall lead him back to the stables. The last was punctuated with a massive yawn that he tried desperately to suppress. Let us do that together, Lady Stark said with a smile. And then perhaps a honeycake or two, a cup of milk and a story. You've had a long day, Robert. She looked up. Domeric, Lord Stark wishes to see you in his solar. I suspect that you know what it is about. Anna, I shall take care of young Robert. She smiled rather enigmatically at Anna, who blushed for some reason, and then she left with the boy and his new pony. Domeric Bolton was standing there, white as a sheet. After a moment he swallowed with a gulp, smiled wanly at Jory and Anna, and then left. Lady Stark is taking her nephew to the stables. Lord Stark is in his solar. There is little chance, I hope, that anyone with red eyes will wander past. Anna sounded amused and something else. No, he said slowly as he took a cautious step towards her. I think not. He froze and then stared around them. My apologies, I did not mean to tempt fate. She laughed softly and then sobered. That night, before Lord Stark interrupted us with his eyes of red fire, what were you about to ask me? He looked at her and all of a sudden his heart was hammering in his chest as if he had run a mile. I said that I was and still am looking forwards to showing you the north. And I am keen to see it. I do not know how long I shall be here. I am just Lord Robert's nursemaid. He will not always need me. What will you do when he does not? Go home. And where is home? She smiled at him. Wherever my heart is. And where is your heart? Wait, I would tell you where mine is. She stepped a little closer to him. And where is yours? She was almost whispering now. With yours. And with that he finally took her in his arms and kissed her. And judging by the way that she stepped into the embrace and then melted against him as she returned that kiss, he knew that she'd be staying in Winterfell for a while. Domeric. He paused in front of the door, before taking a deep breath and then knocking. After what felt like an age he finally heard a voice call, "Come." He opened the door, stepped in and then closed it again. Lord Stark was standing by his desk. He was dressed in his usual leathers, but there was a formality about him that made him stand a little straighter and taller. This was important. And, the desk also held something else. The Fist of Winter. This was beyond important now. This was about the future of his very house. He felt his legs shake for a moment and then he stiffened them. He had to be strong for this moment. You asked to see me, Lord Stark. I did indeed, Domeric. Take a seat, please. He sat carefully and then looked at Lord Stark, who looked back at him with his head tilted slightly to one side and his hand stroking his chin, which he did when he was thinking very hard. After a moment Lord Stark smiled slightly. Domeric, I have been considering your request to marry Sansa. Considering it mostly carefully indeed. I am sorry for the time that it has taken to give you an answer on this, but it was a matter of the greatest import for me. I even wrote to Lord Redfort to ask his opinion of you. Domeric felt his cheeks burn. Lord Redfort was a man whose good opinion he had always worked hard to earn. Very hard indeed. Lord Redfort was the man that he had secretly wished could have been his father. Just but fair. A true knight. I respect Lord Redfort very much indeed, Lord Stark. May I ask what he said about me? Lord Stark leant back in his chair a little. Nothing but good things. No complaints were ever made against you in your years at the Red Fort, just the opposite in fact. He said that it was an honor to know the fine young man that you became. He felt his eyes moisten for a moment as he remembered his time at the Red Fort. How he missed that place. That was most kind of him. It was. It also fitted in with my own observations of you. I have watched you most carefully, Domeric. We Starks pick our marriage alliances most carefully. For a Bolton to marry a Stark, well, there will be many who wonder the reason, given the history between our two families. Now I know what that reason is. I have talked to Sansa. You are in love. His cheeks reddened again. I do not deny it, Lord Stark. His voice seemed squeaky in his own ears and he cursed his reaction. I do love Sansa. Lord Stark's eyes narrowed a fraction as he looked at him. She has also confided in me that you have plans for House Bolton. Plans that might include a new banner. Enlighten me if you can. He sat there for a long moment as he ran through his answers in his own mind. Finally he settled on the brutal truth. The flayed man banner is a link to a past that I want no part of. I would never flay a man, the very thought is abhorrent to me. An upright red sword on a white background perhaps, or a sword over a cross of red on a white background. I have not yet decided. I gave Sansa my word that we would settle it together. But no more flayed man, or the colors thereof. There was a short silence as Lord Stark absorbed this. Your father will not approve. I do not care. I honor my father on many things. This is not one of those things. This is more important. I will be lord of the Dread Fort one day. I would not have it feared. I would have it respected. Another short silence. And then Lord Stark stood. Good. Then your suit to marry Sansa is approved. I will send a raven to the Dread Fort, summoning your father. He and I will talk about many things. There is one last thing though. Marriages last for many years, the old gods providing. I would have my daughter Sansa happy throughout those years. And that is the greatest condition of all. Domeric fell to his knees and then placed a hand on the fist of Winter. Lord Stark, by the old gods, I, Domeric Bolton, do swear this oath of my own free will. Should I ever disappoint, betray or harm your daughter, Sansa Stark, I will take whatever punishment you deem necessary. Even death. This, I swear. Perhaps it was the moment, or perhaps it was his imagination, but he felt the floor shake just a fraction as he said those words. This oath I accept, as the Stark in Winterfell. Domeric looked up at the man who was going to become his good father. And for a moment he fancied that he saw red fire in the eyes of Lord Stark. Tyrion. Every time they stopped he'd find his eyes looking at the horizon, at the nearest crag or hill. He was looking for links. He was starting to think that he was finding them. He looked down at the map on the pommel of the saddle as they rode north. He was also taking notes as they went, because what he was seeing was both fascinating and deeply worrying. The north was preparing. Preparing for two things in particular. The first, given by the amount of sowing and field clearance, was winter. A long and, judging by the amount of repair work being undertaken on homes and buildings, a terrible one. The second thing was war. Men were drilling when they weren't working on the fields of chopping wood and storing it for drying out. They stopped for lunch near another crag and as he dismounted he stole a look at Daisy Sherestone. The closer that they got to Winterfell the quieter and more terse she became. He suspected that she would have some anguished words with Lord Stark as to why he had not acknowledged the news of the death of her beloved father. He ate quickly and then stumped over to the crag, leaving the others behind him. They were used to this by now, so they no longer sent silly questions in his direction anymore. Yes, this looked as if steps had been carved in the side of it, curving upwards. In some areas the stone looked almost blackened, as if great fires had been set repeatedly at the base of the steps. Something cracked under his feet and he looked down. He was standing on loose shards of stone, but here and there, once in a while there were there. He bent down and picked up a shard of a particular shape and color. It was an arrowhead, or at least part of one. Who knew how long it had been laying there? He peered at it closely. Dragon glass, or obsidian. Just like the other fragments had found scattered around the other crags he had seen. Now, to find such things at one crag would have been interesting, 2 a coincidence but 5. No, that meant something. He just had no idea what. He pulled the little bag from his pouch, opened it, placed the partial arrowhead in with the others he had found, tugged it shut again and then walked back to the others. As he did he noticed another mound of earth about 100 yards to one side. The earth was bare and barren and not a thing grew on it. He shivered a little and then remounted. They made good progress that day, better than he could have imagined just a fortnight before. The road was good, recently repaired. Which was a good thing, given the amount of traffic that seemed to be on it. That night they stopped at one of the best inns that Tyrion had seen so far in the north, a formidable place that looked almost like a manor house. It had a bathhouse that was linked to a hot spring and Tyrion soaked away his aches and pains in some luxury, with a mug of cold ale in one hand and a scrubbing brush almost as long as himself in the other. The Inn of Sanctuary was its name, and it also did a damn good supper, well-cooked venison. The girls looked clean and scrubbed, but he did not avail himself of one. Instead he watched Daisy Sheristone. She had used the baths in the women's section of the bathhouse, emerging scrubbed and clean but almost wan. She ate quietly and then had wandered outside. Tyrion viewed her passage, mulled things over, sighed and then drank the last of his wine, marked a place in his book and then strode over to the door. Night had fallen and he had trouble at first working out where she was. Then he saw her. She was standing to one side, staring up at the stars. And the stars, what stars? The sky was clear of clouds and the stars blazed down. He could even see that great long ribbon of light that told of a huge belt of stars. A wondrous sight, the stars, he said softly as he walked up to her. I wish that I had studied them better. There was a long pause and then she finally spoke. My father loved them. He taught me much about them. The Shuristones have been watching the sky since time out of mind. They are beautiful. And I wish that I did not see the threat that hangs in them. He eyed her out of the corner of his eye. Threat? Do you see the crook? He peered at the horizon. I. Then he paused. Oh. I see the base of it as well. You can't even see that in King's Landing at this time of year. Or in the Stormlands. It's one of the things that we descendants of the first men must look for. When the base of the crook appears, when it starts to grow higher, it's a sign. She sounded, tired and almost defeated. A sign of what? The long winter comes, Tyrion Lannister. It comes. As do the others. And even Casterly Rock will shiver. She looked at him and then smiled a smile of infinite tiredness. The others come. The Stark calls for aid. I am needed. And then she sighed and walked back into the inn. Tyrion stood there for a long, long moment, staring up at the stars. And then he shivered, as if his spine had been brushed with ice, before going back inside as well. Winterfell tomorrow. And perhaps answers too. Aemon. Castle Black was well astir by the time that he had finished feeding his ravens with the help of a young man. It was good to be back at his quarters. But there was a difference to the Castle Black that he had returned to. It felt, well, alive. He remembered what it had been like when he had first joined the Night's Watch. It had been a different place to the one that he had left weeks ago for Winterfell. All those decades ago there had still been a sense of vigor about the place. That had ebbed away over the long years. Until now. As he had approached Castle Black he had heard the sounds of hammering and the clink of trowels on stone. The noise of barrels being rolled over cobblestones. The clash of metal on metal, accompanied by the bellowed shouts from Alisa Thorne that he had seen small children fight harder. But there had been something in his voice that spoke of a grudging satisfaction. And there had been something else, in the background. Laughter. Castle Black felt alive again. More voices, more work on its upkeep, more energy pounding through it. It made him feel years younger. Well, some years younger. He quirked his lips into a slight smile and then wiped it from his face. He needed to see the Lord Commander. The young man assisted him to the quarters occupied by Gia Mormont, who was talking to someone not too far away. Something about repairing the next castle down more. It made him feel, more than a bit stunned. The Night's Watch itself seemed to be coming alive again. Footsteps and then the scrape of a chair. Maester Aemon. Lord Commander. I wish that the first ranger had stopped for longer before he left. He seemed determined. Aemon nodded thoughtfully. He seemed very determined at Winterfell as well. Lord Stark tasked him with an important mission. The Lord Commander sighed. Benjen Stark discussed it with me. The Hand of a White. If it wasn't for hearing the call, I would have told him not to be a fool. How strongly was the call heard here? I was in Winterfell when it was issued. I heard it all too well myself. My mother was a Dane, you see, of the first men. There was a pause and then a rasping noise as Gia ran a hand over his beard. It came during the evening meal. And everyone heard it, clear as a bell. Everyone within Castle Black. Same with the other two castles on the wall. Everyone, no matter what their lineage, heard it. Interesting. Some magic from the wall perhaps. I was on the privy at the time and I damn near shat myself, rumbled a new voice, and Eamon realized with a start that he had been so intent on Gia's answer that he had failed to notice the arrival of Alisa Thorne. I would never have believed it if I had not heard it. The door closed and the other man took a seat. What news from Winterfell then, Maester Eamon? As you know, the others come. There was more proof. Lord Stark was given a vision by the old gods. A most worrying sign indeed. And a room within Winterfell was discovered. A room containing objects known to past Starks. Records as well. Lord Stark did not know anything about them. His father did, but that knowledge died with him and Brandon Stark in King's Landing, thanks to my fool of a great-nephew. He found himself snarling the last 5 words and then caught himself as the other two coughed and probably looked embarrassed. Thorne had been a Targaryen loyalist. What kind of records? Gia asked after a moment. Copies of records to and from Castle Black, amongst other things. Which disturbs me greatly, as no such records exist now, or none that I know of. I thought that everything was in your offices. Thorne asked. How could Winterfell have such copies but we lack them? I know not, but I would like to have the older part of Castle Black searched for any blocked off rooms. I have had the time to think much on this matter, and I cannot believe that the records were lost entirely. Some must still remain, somewhere. A good point, rumbled Gia. I shall order it so. We have more than enough men here now. So I heard. When did they arrive? Not long after the call was heard, Thorne said reluctantly. Men wanting to help. Women too. They had heard the call as well. They offered services, brought food, offered to repair the walls, cook. Food's a damn sight better than it used to be. How many then have taken the black? Of the men, 1 in 3, Gia said quietly. The rest wish to volunteer to help fight the others. I've never heard of the like of it, but they insist. They want to help. Volunteers on the wall. Bloody odd. But they've changed this place. We've gone from quiet despair, do not pull that damn face, Thorne, you know it to be true, to quiet hope. We have parties out now working on the next 3 castles, assessing what needs to be done and making repairs. Might be able to start sending out garrisons in a month or 2, on a temporary basis at least. The same is happening with the Shadow Tower and Eastwatch by the Sea. Of the latter, Cotter Pike sends word that ships have been docking with more and volunteers there. Eamon nodded at this. I think that a party must also be sent to the Night Fort. That place was the first to be built along the wall and the greatest as well. It might well have records, or at least artifacts. And if the others are indeed moving southwards, then the Black Gate must be secured. There was a silence. And then from both of the other men, what Black Gate? He did his best not to roll his eyes in disgust. Do you mean to say, he barked, that the Lord Commander and the Master of Arms have not consulted the histories of the wall? The other two harumphed and he waved a hand in apology. Your pardon. I read of it long ago. There is a gate beneath the Night Fort that is sealed so that only a member of the Night's Watch who speaks the words of the vow can open it. The others should not be able to access it. Nevertheless, it must be secured. There was a creaking noise from the chair that Gia Mormont was sitting in. I did not know that. Very well. Who should lead that party? He thought deeply for a long moment. I am not sure. Given the import of what might be found there as well as the terrible legends that surround the place, we must choose wisely. In the meantime, we must await the return of Benjen Stark. We must have proof of the others and their whites. Proof would be good, Thorne said wryly. Then he seemed, from his next words, to sober a little. The thought of fighting the dead terrifies me. Me too. There was a different kind of creaking from Gia Mormont's chair, as if he was leaning forwards perhaps. But we are of the Night's Watch. And we do what must be done. Thorne said, before pushing his own chair back and standing. Well said. I have much to think on. And some men to train that aren't as bad as some of the scum we've had in the past. And then he stamped out. Lord Commander Eamon said after a moment. I understand that the wilderling raids have diminished. More than diminished, ceased. It's almost odd. But if indeed the others have returned, well then they must be more informed than we are. Word came that man's radar has been seen near the wall. I'm not sure what worries me more, the wildlings ceasing their raids or that radar has been sighted. Eamon nodded. It might be that a common cause might be made between us. A rasp of hand over beard again. Mayhaps. Mayhaps. Ned Stark has sent a raven saying that he need to talk to me face to face about matter regarding the wildlings. That might be it. I also wonder how far the call went. That last sentence was said bleakly. To your son perhaps. Eamon said the words gently. Such a call would have gone far. And he paused, thought about it and then went on. Forgive me, but the crimes of our families cannot be forgotten. I should know. How we deal with those crimes defines us. There was another moment of silence. And then Gia Mormont cleared his throat. I know. I know. I just wish, but he was interrupted by the sound of a horn being blown in the distance. That's from north of the wall. There was a long pause and then shouting outside, before a rumble of feet on the corridor outside and then a knock on the door, before it creaked open after Gia Mormont's growled command to enter. Lord Commander. The two men that the first ranger went beyond the wall with have returned. One seems to be injured. Is the first ranger not with them? Gia growled. No, Lord Commander. One of the men shouted up that the first ranger sent them back whilst he went on with his mission. Gia sighed heavily. Very well. The door creaked closed again. Bugger. Now I'm worried. He knows the haunted forest well, Eamon pointed out. In fact far better than most. But I'm still worried. Jaime. Janos Slynt did not die well. He was in a bad enough way after just a day in a black cell. Robert Baratheon did at least look at the evidence against him and then immediately proclaimed that he and his 3 main lieutenants should be put to death, but when the moment came he rapidly fell to pieces. When Jaime first caught sight of him, the man was being half dragged and half carried by 2 guards in Baratheon liveries who did not look happy. As they approached, Jaime realized why. Slynt was burbling a constant stream of piteous whimperings about how this was not justice, how he was innocent, about how unfair this all was, about how he had been betrayed. When he saw the baying crowd, the headsman's block and the motionless figure of Robert Baratheon holding Stormbreaker flat against his chest, point down, then, well, Slynt didn't just lose control of his legs, but also his bladder and his bowels, given the curses from the gods and the revolting trail that the wretched man left. He was finally deposited at the feet of the Fat King, who looked down at the former commander of the Gold Cloaks with considerable disgust. Gods, man, can't you even die in a clean fashion? Your Grace, blubbered Slynt wetly, with his neck on the block, mercy, please, I shall take the black, I will go to the wall, I confess it all, but spare me. The king laughed. Send you to the wall? Never, the Night's Watch would think I scorned them for send such a man like you there. Then he sobered and there might even have been a flash of sympathy. Chin up. I'll make it quick. Looking at the crowd, Baratheon set his shoulders and then spoke. I, Robert Baratheon, the first of my name, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the 7 Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, do hear and serve sentence of death on this man Janos Slynt. For the crime of corruption. Of taking bribes. Of malfeasance. And of murder. I have found him guilty and I will swing the sword, as in the old days. Slynt screwed his eyes closed and therefore never saw the great blade come up and then flash down. His head bounced once, twice and then stopped. As the crowd cheered, Jaime frowned a little. He thought he could hear thunder rumbling somewhere. He wasn't the only one. Seaworth, who had been standing grim-faced at the head of a large group of pale-faced gold cloaks, turned his head to seawards. Odd, Jaime heard him mutter. I smell no storm coming. Jaime turned back to the spot where the Fat King was standing. Men in Baratheon livery ran out to pull the body away, take up the head to place it on a spike and, thank the gods on this warm day, to wash down the flagstones with buckets of water. But as the next man was dragged out for execution, Jaime was more fascinated by the sword. Stormbreaker was starting to puzzle him. It was the sword of the Durandons, but the Durandons had been of the First Men. The sword of Durand, God's grief, should have been bronze. But this was not. It reminded him of dawn a little, by the sheen. Which might explain why Duran had been king. Then he frowned a little. The sword should have been bloody. It was not. Had Baratheon cleaned it quickly? The next man did not disgrace himself as badly as Slynt. Instead he went to his death in silence, spitting at the ground in front of the crowd as they booed at him. His fatness didn't even bother with last words. He simply took his head from his shoulders with a single savage swipe that looked contemptuous. Jaime stared at the king of Westeros. Yes, the man looked alive again in some terrible way. But there was no blood on the sword. Had he shaken it? The third man was as bad as Slynt, a cowardly wreck who wailed at the sight of the block, and the sword, and everything about Robert Baratheon. Jaime averted his eyes for much of it, because it was frankly embarrassing. And then the fourth man came forwards. He was a dark-haired man who strode to the block with a straight back and a face that showed deep shame. The crowd seemed to sense it and they booed him less than the others. Baratheon looked him over and then nodded at him somberly. "Kneel, lad." And then, as the shame-faced man did so, Baratheon said something that surprised Jaime. "I know why you took the coin," he rumbled in a low voice. "Your wife and your son took sick. But even after they were better you kept taking it. That was not right." "I know, your grace, and I am ashamed of it," the man replied, tears in his eyes. "My family will have a pension. My word on that. But there's a price." The gold cloak nodded and then braced himself. "I will pay it." "Good lad." The sword came up and then slashed down. The head thudded to the ground and the crowd cheered again. But Jaime's eyes were on the sword. This time there was blood. How odd. His fatness stepped over the body and then looked at the assembled crowd and the gold cloaks who had watched the whole thing with such pale faces. "People of King's Landing. These men did you most grievous wrong. These men betrayed your trust in taking bribes. And I will not have that. I will have justice in this city and not corruption. And trust instead of betrayal. You have my word on that. Long live King Robert the Just." The call came from a squinting little man not too far from Jaime and he peered languidly around as the crowd of small folk threw their sweaty caps in the air and about stank the place out with their stinking breath. His fatness beamed a little grimly at them, hefted Stormbreaker with one hand as if he was a little surprised about something and then sheathed it, before slinging it onto his back and then stomping towards his horse. It was only then that Jaime caught sight of Joffrey, who was staring at the heads of the three gold cloaks as they were being placed onto the pikes on the nearest gateway. There was an odd look on his face, like a combination of uncertainty, fascination and excitement. And then he seemed to catch himself as the hulking and grim-faced form of Sandor Clegane brushed past him, before darting after his fatness. "Father," he heard Joffrey smirk at Baratheon, "can I practice with Stormbreaker?" "Of course you can, lad, but not just yet. You need to get some muscles on you first. T's a heavy sword. Lighter with use, but too heavy for you just yet. You need to practice with your own more first to build yourself up." "Clegane." "Your grace." The scarred man stepped forwards. "Train my son a bit harder, will you?" Clegane eyed Joffrey. "He's lazy." "I am not." Joffrey protested. "Yes, he is, your grace." Baratheon stopped and turned on Joffrey, who blanched a bit. "Always train, lad. There's a war coming. There always is. There will be when you're king eventually. So always train." He pulled a face as if he was reminded of something. "And I must train now. I'm too damn fat, still. No longer." He eyed the horse nearby. "Sir Barristan." "Your grace." The Lord Commander called from one side. "I need to train. I also need to talk to someone with knowledge of sword making." Sir Barristan Selmy pursed his lips with thought for a moment. "For the former I think the Red Keep, your grace. For the latter I know of at least one place you can find experts on the Street of Steel." Baratheon nodded and then mounted. "Sir Barristan and I have some questions to ask then, on the Street of Steel. Kingslayer, Clegane, get my son back to the Red Keep." He nodded at them and then rode off with the Lord Commander in a great clattering of hooves. Jaime watched them go with a sardonic eye. And then, very far away, he seemed to hear the boom of distant thunder. Melisandre. The servants built the fire quickly. She knew that they were deathly afraid of her, but she did not care. They were sworn to her service. Their lives were hers to do with as the Red God commanded. Today they would build her a great fire, the greatest that they could. She needed to see the flames, to look into them and see the visions of the path she now had to tread. She had to admit that she was getting impatient. Her visions had become clouded of late, for the first time that she could remember. Clouded by what though? She could not say. It was as if the eye of her mind was suddenly unfocused, as if Arla had lifted his gaze from her. Which was, of course, impossible. So much had happened to lead her to this place, this point. An island just to the west of Tioche. She had had her servants take her there by ship, with all the wood that they bring without sinking the ship. And now the great fire was complete. Go, she said coldly to them. Leave this place. What is to happen here is not for the likes of you. Go. Return in the morning for me. They bowed and then they all but fled. They lacked her faith. Well, what did they know? What could they know? Nothing. Poor fools. A walk around the fire revealed that even though they were fools they had done their job well. Wood piled upon wood, soaked in lamp oil. She nodded and then picked up a burning brand and thrust it into the kindling, before stepping back as it started to take. The flames crackled at first and then started to roar. As the main section of the fire caught and the wood started to blacken, the roar increased to almost a shriek. Yes, they had built it well. The heat roared off the great blaze and she felt her lips peel back in a smile of joy. Arla was with her, the Lord of Light was here. She undid her robes until they fell to the ground and stepped as close to the fire as she could, reveling in the heat on her naked body. The grass started to brown and curl between her toes. She minded it not. The flames danced and sang to her and she stared into them. Yes, something was appearing. Visions of Tioche. Faces of men and women, young and old. Did they matter? It was a start at least. The vision was crisp and clear. Where to turn her gaze next? Dragonstone. That had been where her feet had been taking her before this odd mist had descended. Not yet. East perhaps. She frowned a little. Yes. Eastwards. The 5 forts appeared in the flames, a chain against the forces of the Great Other. Were they manned yet? They should be. Where were the fortsmen? Coming. She frowned harder. Her brother should have it in hand. She'd have his heart in a brazier if he did not. Where next? South. She smiled a little and then she frowned. Eyes flashed from bronze panels and she would tell that something had changed there, that something had awoken. What though? She had long suspected that something was hidden to the south. She did not know what. She did not look to the southeast. That way madness still lay. North now. Animals seemed to crowd the streets of Pentos, whilst something seemed to be growing there. She stared into the flames. A girl. There was too much confusion there. A horseman flickered in and out and then vanished. And then something seemed to flash across the sky for a moment. And then, as she tried to look further north, there was something else. Something moving westwards. She blinked and shook her head a moment. No. Nothing had wings of ice. And now she took a deep breath and turned to look westwards again. She had to see where he was, the Azra High. Where had he been born? How was he to be forged by his trials anew into a weapon for the Lord of Light? Dragonstone appeared in the flames, but there was some odd about it, something she had not seen before. Tendrils of light flowed north from it. What could they be? An old man's face appeared, as he talked with a fond smile with a young girl with a shadow on her face that seemed to seethe and flex and then vanish. Westwards again, and then the mist descended again. She wanted to scream in frustration. What was this? She sharpened her focus and stared more intently. For a moment a number of flashing images appeared. A man with a sword on his back and lightning bolts flashing around him, sloughing off old layers of himself. A child. A child who commanded fire. Snakes that found purpose. A garden blooming mightily. A one-eyed lion with a sword of light. An empty man finding a purpose again. a man with the blood of a wolf and a sword that shone like a star. And men and women with the heads of wolves. And then the mist slammed down and she could see nothing. Wait. There was something appearing. A face. A white face of wood. A tree. Yes, a weirwood tree. A heart's tree. Was that the name? And then the eyes carved into the tree opened to reveal orbs of red fire. We are stronger now, she heard a great voice boom in her ear. We were weaker before. No longer. You are wrong about so many things, Red Priestess. Cast your eyes eastwards. Your brother is not as strong as you are. Who are you? She barked the question at the terrible face. Are you a servant of the great other? The red orbs blazed harder. Foolish child. The enemy has many faces. Ours is not one of them. Your red god was always a fool to think that only he could fight them. This is a greater fight than you think. Things have changed here. We are stronger. Things that were sleeping have awoken. Things that you cannot understand. Do not come here. You will only do harm. Events are in motion that must not be disturbed. The others are awake. And old friends who thought each other dead are meeting again. Cast your eyes not again to the west. Now go. The face roiled and rippled and suddenly she found herself flying backwards, landing in a breathless and astonished heap. She looked at the roaring fire and then shook her head in confusion. As she looked, part of the fire collapsed inwards as the wood was consumed and a great blaze of sparks flew upwards. And those sparks briefly formed the shape of a tree. Tyrion. The moment he finally saw the gatehouse of Winterfell he sighed at the thought of what lay within. Good food. A bed. A bath. Oh, and maid servants, preferably ones with large breasts and sultry smiles. He thought for a moment about sending everyone on ahead and finding a good brothel, but then changed his mind at once. No. He had his duty to do first. As they rode to the gate he had Aemon shake out the banner that had been furled since the twins, and he smiled a little as the red and gold cloth shook and boomed in the breeze from the west. He heard shouts from the gatehouse and then the gates opened. As they entered he looked around with quick glances. The winter town outside the fortress had shown great signs of being worked on and renewed, rebuilt even in places. And Winterfell itself seemed to be a hive of activity, with men and women working on so many things. Blacksmiths were busy, as was a small brick kiln not too far away. Almost interesting. Yes, they were preparing for something. War or winter. Or perhaps both. He drew rein as he saw what looked like a maester walking towards him, with a young man with the auburn hair of a Tully. And that young man stopped dead in his tracks at the sight of Tyrion and his eyes widened as if he had not just recognized him but knew him somehow. And then he seemed to shake his head a little and strode ahead of the maester. You are Tyrion Lannister. The young Stark, who else could it be with hair that color, sounded like a man trying to make a grim voice lighter, and Tyrion blinked a little at the thought of it. What was going on here? I see that my fame has preceded me. He smiled and then noted that whilst the Stark boy smiled for a moment with his mouth, he did not smile with his eyes. I am indeed Tyrion Lannister. Robb Stark. This is Maester Lewin. Word did not reach us of your coming. It did not. Oh. Damn, father. Your pardon. Your father sent word to the major houses that they send any word back about the legend that is the others. So I was sent by my father from Casterly Rock with what we had on this topic. He heard the beginning of a throat being cleared behind him and then forestalled it. And I have also had the high and signal honor of escorting the lady. But he was interrupted by an astonished voice from one side. Daisy. Cousin Daisy. What are you doing here? Everyone looked over to see an astonished-looking Lord Eddard Stark as he stared at Daisy Shuristone. Then he beamed at her and hurried over. I have not seen you for years. How is your father? Why did he send you here? Tyrion watched her closely and then winced as many emotions seemed to flash over her face. Anger, confusion, bemusement, and then astonishment and horror. He had heard her muttering a few times on the road to Winterfell, practicing a great tirade against her cousin for abandoning her. And how it seems that he had forestalled her by being, well, oblivious to her recent ordeal. Lord Stark, she said eventually in a shaking voice. My father is dead. He went pale at that. No, surely not. He was hale and hearty when I saw him last. He may have been then, but he died. Many weeks ago. I was told that word had been sent to Winterfell on this. When I heard nothing back I thought that. Her face crumpled with anguish for a moment, and then in an instant Lord Stark was at the side of her horse. Oh, by the gods, Daisy, I knew not a thing. No word of his passing came here, I swear it. I am so sorry. You must have thought that we had abandoned you, when nothing like that had happened. And then he seemed to catch himself. Lord Tyrion, please accept the hospitality of Winterfell, for you and your men. Quarters will be provided for them, and a meal and ale. Maester Lewin, please take charge of the books that Lord Tyrion has brought. Robb, can you go or send someone to your mother and have them tell her to meet us in my solar? Then join us too. You too, Lord Tyrion. Then he looked at his younger relative. Daisy, welcome to Winterfell, cousin. As everyone dismounted and servants rushed about to collect horses and take down saddlebags, Tyrion looked at Daisy Shirestone worriedly. She seemed as if she was about to fly into 1,000 jagged pieces, but then she seemed to rally herself, shaking her head a little and then dismounting herself. Tyrion sighed and was in the process of dismounting himself when he froze. Over to one side there was what looked a building containing a set of kennels, and in the doorway sat a giant wolf that was staring at him intently. He opened his mouth to say something, but then discovered that a combination of terror and fascination had strangled his vocal cords. Lord Stark caught his look of shock and then looked at the kennels. Mind her not. She's interested in everything. Daisy Shirestone had also frozen in place at the sight of the creature, and then a huge smile lit up her face, making her appear beautiful for a long moment. Ned. You have a direwolf. I have. It has been an interesting few weeks. Then he flushed a little. Your pardon. You have lost your father. Come. Tyrion kept an eye on that direwolf as he walked towards the door of the keep. He still couldn't believe that it was there. Weren't direwolves supposed to be extinct south of the wall? Then he pulled a slight face. Might as well add it to the list of odd things that had happened. By the time that they reached Lord Stark's study he was starting to wonder what else was going on. He'd counted men in the liveries of at least 3 of the important houses of the North: Umber, Reed and Bolton. The latter had been confined to one young man with a harp who might have been Domeric Bolton. He'd seen him once from a distance at the Red Fort when he had been there on a visit on behalf of father. And then when he got to the solar he came damn near to tripping over his own feet. Parts of the room were covered in books and records, whilst one wall had a great map of the North that had very disturbing implications if it meant what he thought it did. Were there really that many settlements north of the wall? As they sat and Lord Stark passed him bread and salt and more importantly a goblet of rather good wine, Tyrion watched as Daisy Shirestone sat down, and for the first time since he had met her she seemed to relax a little. Boots rang in the corridor, along with softer feet, and Robb Stark entered with some who can only have been his mother. She was a Tully to her fingertips, and from the way that she warmly embraced Daisy the two had met before. Then she turned to Tyrion and he noticed that there was something at the back of her eyes as she greeted him. There was caution there. And unease. What was going on? Why did they seem to dislike Lannisters so much? My thanks, Lord Stark, he said after another sip of wine, before noticing that an elderly balding man with the chains and robes of a maester had also entered, closing the door him. I should perhaps briefly mention my role in your cousin being here. I met the Lady Daisy in an inn about 3 days' ride south of here. A badly run inn that had a thief and a scoundrel in charge of it. Food appalling, drink worse, filth everywhere. Things going missing. Coin especially. He was cheating your cousin and I suspect that he had designs on her. Daisy closed her eyes and nodded wordlessly, whilst Lord Stark stared at them both and then turned a very nasty shade of red. Where is this piece of filth? He asked the question in a commendably level voice. Dead, Tyrion said with considerable satisfaction. He made the mistake of trying to cheat a most formidable woman who was staying there with her merchant husband. A punch was thrown, knocking the landlord out, and sadly it was later discovered that he fallen headfirst into a full bucket and drowned. The inn has been taken over and improved enormously, and I offered to escort the Lady Daisy here. To Winterfell. Lord Stark settled a little, the anger leaving his face. Then you have my most grateful thanks, Lord Tyrion. Daisy, how did you come to be there though? She sighed. Father died during a visit by cousin Willem, Sir Willem Bootle. He was father's heir, although he was there at the time still escapes me as. One moment, Daisy, Lord Stark interrupted. But I don't understand. Bootle was not your father's heir. Your father came to me a year ago and told me that in the event of his death, Sir Willem Bootle was not to be allowed anywhere near Surestone. Word had reached us from the Riverlands, via my brother Ed Muir, that Sir Willem was a spendthrift, an idiot and a ne'er-do-well, Lady Stark said with a frown. We told your father this. Daisy looked at them both, obviously baffled. He said nothing to me. When word came of Sir Willem's visit, he just looked grim and said that it would be an awkward time for us as he had bad news to pass on. But he never said, wait, if Bootle was not the heir to Surestone, who was? You, Daisy, Lord Stark said gently. Your father came to me and said that Bootle would be removed from the succession as being unfit, and that he was always unfit, as there should always be a Surestone in Surestone, as was the tradition. You should have inherited, as Mage Mormont did at Bear Island after her brother disgraced himself. Your father made that very clear to me, and also left me a copy of his will and testament, signed in front of me and witnessed duly by me. Why did he not tell me? And why did Bootle say otherwise? Daisy Surestone sounded angry and confused. Tyrion broke in, a horrible suspicion crystallizing in his own mind. What exactly happened when Bootle arrived? Father took him to his solar and they spoke for a long time. I saw Bootle afterwards and he looked very angry. That night father took ill. And what was the nature of this illness? Tyrion asked, feeling angry with himself for not asking this before. It took on the nature of an apoplexy. He could not speak and could barely open his eyes. He died the next day. And as he lay sick and dying, Sir Willem Bootle announced that as the heir everyone had to obey his orders. And after father was dead, Bootle said that he would send word to Winterfell, dismissed the Maester, all but looted my home and went off with it south. There was a numb horror in her voice. Yes, she suspected too. Poison perhaps. Tyrion said the words softly and grimly, and the room went still as they all seemed to think the same dark thoughts. Maester. Lewin, was it? Yes. Arabinder perhaps. Or Hearts Forlorn. The Maester pursed his lips a little in thought. Either might bring on the appearance of an apoplexy before killing. And both are known in the Riverlands. He shook his head a little. And both are cruel ways to kill a man. The Maester at Surestone was Grantle by name, I think. A very young man and also inexperienced. Oddly enough, Daisy Surestone now looked very like a female version of Lord Stark, whilst Robb Stark was pale with fury. And equally oddly he exchanged a peculiar look with his father that ended with the younger Stark shaking his head a little in some kind of message. Maester Lewin, Lord Stark said in a voice as implacable as the mountains of the north, I need to send a raven to my good father at Riverrun as soon as possible. I must demand the arrest and trial of Sir Willem Bootle on charges of murder and thievery. He robbed my cousin of her birthright. I will prepare a raven at once, my lord, Lewin said formally. My swiftest one to Riverrun. And I shall have some words to add to my father, Lady Stark said, shaking her head. This is terrible. My poor Daisy, we will get you back Surestone. And the things that this Bootle stole. Benjen. He was being watched. He'd know that for some time now, perhaps a day or so. The question was who was watching him. Wildlings. Perhaps not. He'd seen two groups in the past few days. Both had gone out of their way to avoid him, albeit with some hard stares and hands on sword pommels. But this new watcher was different. More mysterious. He gave a mental shrug as he rode Wanderer through the forest. Whoever they were, he so far sensed no ill will towards him. It was almost odd. Wanderer plodded on and he looked about keenly. He almost liked the haunted forest, there was a refreshing simplicity about the place. It was clean. He knew that he was foolish to go on alone though. However, Alec had fallen badly after his horse had shied at a raven that had flown almost straight at its head, and he'd broken his arm badly. Too badly to continue, and in fact too badly to get back to the wall safely. He was a good man, Alec, a good woodsman, so he'd sent him back with Royce. Royce worried him, and he knew that the man worried the old bear as well. He may have been a Royce of Runestone and therefore of the first men, but he was too arrogant at times, to show that he knew right and men of lower rank knew wrong. True, he had changed since he had heard the call and apparently could sometimes be almost civil to the lower-born brothers of the Night's Watch, but Benjen still worried about him. He needed to learn that the wall demanded certain changes to his way of thinking. He stopped at noon and kindled a small fire, using it to cook a haunch of the rabbit that he'd killed 3 days before and left to hang from the back of his saddle wrapped in an old piece of cloth. As he ate he plotted his course in his head. North, parallel with the river. He'd avoided Craster's keep. That man set his teeth on edge every time he saw him these days. There was something no right with him and instead he wanted to head for the hills that led to the first of the first men. A ranging patrol had vanished near there 2 months before. Perhaps they had been killed by whites. The thought of whites and the others made him shift uneasily for a moment. This seemed almost mad, but he had heard the call so clearly on the way back to Castle Black. It had shaken him to realize that Ned was right. As he finished the last of the rabbit and then carefully doused the fire, he felt those watching eyes on him again. Yes, someone was there. Closer this time. Who were they? And were they living or dead? Straightening up, he walked over to Wanderer and then mounted him. As he checked his reins and settled himself in the saddle, he looked about of the corner of his eyes. No, nothing. No one. Odd. Were they gone? He clicked his tongue and rode on, still north. Every now and then he could see the hills ahead, with the fist of the first men somewhere amongst them. That place fascinated him. The name alone was a mystery. Why a fist? Why had it been so important to the first men? He's once heard an old black brother mention a rumor that the fist had once been a very important place for the Rangers, but that he did not know why. Benjen had explored the place himself a number of times, but had never found anything of significance. An hour or so later he pricked an ear. Someone or something had snorted off to his left, a long way away. After a few minutes he heard another snort, closer now. He paused and then drew his sword carefully. A bear perhaps. Or a direwolf. He could hear the sound of heavy paws crunching on wet snow and damp twigs. What was there? And then he saw a figure looming out of the trees to one side and he stopped, wondered dead in his tracks and stared at him. It was a man. Mounted on an elk, with huge horns. Whoever he was, the man was dressed in black robes, with a hood over his face and scarf wrapped around it. A great bow was at his back, and a quiver filled with long arrows with white fletches at his hip. The moment that he laid eyes on Benjen he nudged the elk to a halt with his feet. There was a long moment of silence as the figure stared at Benjen. Finally it spoke, "Brother." Whoever he was, he spoke in a dry, unused voice that contained an odd note. "You are a brother of the Rangers, I see. Well met." Benjen stared at him. Well, this was no white. But then again, what was he? Well met. "I am Benjen, First Ranger, son of Ricard." The figure nodded in recognition. "There have been times when I have seen you at a distance." "Well met, First Ranger." I am called Cold Hands." An odd name. Benjen frowned a little. Who was this man, and why had he called him brother? "Are you linked to the Night's Watch?" "You called me brother." Cold Hands sighed and then ran a hand over his breast for a moment. "I once served on the wall. A long time ago. A long time indeed. I was different then. Until I was sent on a greater mission. That is a tale for another time. What brings a lone ranger close to the old stronghold north of the wall?" Benjen stared at him and assessed. This was most peculiar. A black brother sent on a greater mission. When? And by who? He mulled it over for another moment and then decided that it was time to take a risk. "The others have returned. We need proof of whites at least. I am hunting for proof of a white." "Proof of a white," Cold Hands mumbled. "They have indeed come. But how did you know?" "A call was issued. The others come. The stark call for aid. You are needed." Whoever this Cold Hands fellow was, he seemed so shocked that he just stared at Benjen for a long moment, before raising a trembling black-gloved hand to the scarf around his mouth and muttering something that Benjen did not catch. And then he turned the elk and gestured to him to follow as he urged the elk to start walking again. Come. Follow. Benjen watched him go for a moment in bewilderment and then kicked Wanderer into moving on again, to follow Cold Hands. Where? Where do we go to? The Overlook. I was wondering when the Rangers would return to it. He frowned. The Overlook. The place of watching. Do you not know of it? No. Then follow and learn. Asher. She was getting tired of seeing dead men in gibbets at the entrances to harbors. This one, however, was different. She knew the man for a start. And he was, or rather now had been, a drowned man. She stared at the corpse. Interesting. He'd just been hung. No stakes. Looking around, she could tell that the sight of the man had, in some odd manner, slightly relaxed her crew. With the exception of Alec, the man who had signed on at Pike and who she suspected was some kind of informer for Damfair. May. Haken was keeping an eye on the little wet runt. If it meant that Alec suffered an accident, then he'd arrange it. As they reached Longstone Quay and tied up, she looked up at the castle. She'd always loved 10 Towers. It was so very different to Pike and its rope bridges and eternal dampness. Dale was standing on the quay, directing repairs to a longship that looked as if it had seen better days. He nodded to her as she approached. Your nuncle sent word to send you to him when you arrived. He's not at the castle today. He's at High Harlaw. She stared at him. He hates High Harlaw. Yes, but that's where he is. I must warn you, he's in a foul mood. She sighed a little and then paused. Who's in the gibbet on the point? A friend of your other nuncle. He started to be shouting a lot when he heard that Black Gregan was on his way to the Shadow Tower with a longship of supplies, men and weapons. It was annoying. So Lord Harlaw cut him short. He smirked a little. Got cheered for it too, by every man nearby. She smiled a little and then strode off to the stables, where she saddled one of the little shaggy ponies that the island was famous for, mounted and then rode out of the gates, down the road to the old holdfast of the Harlaws. As she did, she looked about carefully. The people of Harlaw seemed to be preparing for winter. Odd, that. She'd heard of some communities on Old Wyk were doing the same. She also had an unpleasant feeling that the fight between those who claimed to have heard the call and those who denied it, like Father and Damfair. Her religious nuncle was worrying her a great deal. He appeared to be increasingly angry, increasingly obsessed with punishing those that claimed that the call had been real, that the Stark needed their help. More men were in gibbets at Lord Sport. The lucky ones had died quickly. And now her nuncle Roderick was pushing back. This would not end well, she could tell that. The question was, how bad would it be? When she finally arrived at High Harlaw, she found her nuncle Roderick scowling over a set of records that looked as if they had been locked in a box and then covered in dust for several decades at the very least. But judging from the severity of the scowl, she guessed that he either wasn't finding what he wanted or didn't like what he had found. Useless, he muttered as she slammed the topmost book closed. All useless. Damn my ancestors. What were they so afraid of? Then he looked up. Asher. How is Pike? Parts are heated. Parts are fearful. And parts are dead. Damfair rules over Father at times. There are more gibbets at Lord Sport. He nodded. So I heard. We have one of our own here. We put fools who smell too much of Damfair's madness in it. After we've shut them up, that is. Damfair will not like it. Neither will Father. I care not. I am Lord of Harlaw. My word rules here, not Damfair's. And if your father disagrees, then he set his jaw. We will have words. Asher thought about the kind of words her nuncle was implying and hid a wince. What are you looking for here? He directed an odd look in her direction. Reasons. Reasons for what? He sighed. Reasons for why my ancestors were such damn fools and destroyed so much. She stared at him. Destroyed what? Her nuncle ran a hand through his hair and then gave her another considering look. Then he crooked a finger. I need to show you something. He led her down a long dark corridor and then handed her a burning brand, before starting down a long spiral staircase. It smelled damp down here, and as they descended still further she could see moisture on the walls. The stonework was rougher down here too, older. How old was this place? Which of her ancestors had built it? Or had they built it on something else, something older? A strange feeling stole over her and she shuddered a little. Do you feel them too? She looked at her uncle, who was still leading the way. Feel what? The ghosts. I shudder every time I come down here. I feel the spectre of the past most heavily here. This is the oldest part of High Harlaw. Should be the dampest too, but whoever built it knew his drains well. How old is it? He paused for a moment and then laid a hand on the rough walls. This stonework is that of the first men. I have seen it in other places. Read of it too. A ghost of a smile crossed his face and then he resumed downwards. Asher stared at the walls for an instant and then followed him hurriedly. The stairs ended and a long corridor stretched ahead. There was a slight curve to it, a subtle one, and Asher wasn't sure if it was intentional or not. What she did see was the room that her uncle led her to. Especially as she saw it from a distance. There was an odd, dull light flickering it, like a guttering candle. Her uncle paused at the doorway, set his chin and then walked in. As she reached the doorway as well she stopped dead in her tracks. The walls of the room were covered in something she couldn't quite make out. She peered at the nearest wall. Runes, or the remains of what seemed to be runes. The carvings were glowing fitfully, like dying fireflies. And they had all been incised by lines, as if someone had been trying to destroy them. It was beyond eerie. It gave her the creeping horrors as she looked at the walls. What is this place? I do not know. He said the words heavily, as if it pained him to say such a thing. I wish that I did. All I know is that the steward of High Harlaw was assessing stores not too far from here when he saw the light. It was the first that I ever knew of this place. She raised a hand in bafflement and pointed at the nearest rune. Do you know what they say? No. Whoever carved the lines through them did too good a job of it. And yes, I can read runes. The odd word here and there in some of the darker corners survive, but all they give are hints. Dark hints at that. Blood tide. Outcast. Prophecy. He fell silent and Asher stared at him. What else, nuncle? I see the battle in your face. Words that make my heart sink. Death cult. Lost god. Sea wolf. And most ominously, beware the return of the others. It's the longest fragment. She absorbed this and then looked about the room again. The light, where does it come from? This question brought a sour smile to his face. Oh, that. Simple magic. Probably the magic used by the first men. The thing that your father and Damfair deny even exists. Deny it to the point where they kill men. He spat the words bitterly. Nuncle, Asher started to say, before stopping as she struggled with the words. Nuncle, what is going on? He surprised her by laughing softly for a moment, before spreading his hands. I know not. And it's not from lack of trying. There are no records of this room, no legends of it. Someone carved those runes and then someone else, afterwards, carved lines through them, weakening whatever magic was within them. And from the violence of some of the strokes someone who hated whatever the runes said. There was a pause as her uncle leant tiredly against the wall. They call me the reader, and they think that they insult me. No. It is a simple truth within a name. I read. I try to understand this world of ours. I try to see beyond the walls that your benighted father seeks to build around these islands. I would have a good future for Harlaw, a future where the sails of the Ironborn were not viewed with dread. And I seek to understand the threats that your father and his insane brother would deny even exist. He ran a hand through his hair. Something comes, Asher. Something comes, something black and terrible, a storm like nothing that we have ever seen before. I smell it in the air. This room had a warning here once. A warning carved by the first men. By my ancestors. There have been Harlaws here for hundreds of years, if not longer. Grief rippled over his face for a moment. Feral changed me. When my sons died, well, it broke a part of me. Broke any faith I had in your father as well. Damn him. Asher winced a little. Nuncle. Oh, don't look like that, Asher. Your wretched father is a fool. This notion that the call was some kind of Greenlander mummery, do you know why your father supports his brother Aaron so much? Because he and his drowned men still don't call themselves as such openly make up so much of his support for the old way. The iron price. That's what he bases his power on, after the stupidity of his rebellion against Baratheon. He spat to one side. I have done a lot of thinking of late, he said bitterly. And the more I think about it, the more I wonder if your grandfather Quayan had the right of it. If only he'd lived longer. He might have beaten some sense into your father, instead of your father deciding to turn against what his father believed. This made her look around uneasily. Yes, father's adherence to the old way was traditional. She understood that. And yet father had, in his own way, also let her walk her own path, which was non-traditional. But he also demanded that the people around him charge the iron price. Follow the old way. Nuncle. I am having the island searched for other such rooms. Any records at all? I am searching for answers, because my people are in danger and they need those answers. And if Damfair or even your father try and stop me from protecting my people, I shall turn the waters around this island red with their blood. I will not ignore this, Asher. I cannot. I heard the call to Winterfell. That's something else that I cannot ignore. He shook his head. So now you know where I stand. I do not want you to make a choice as to where you stand yourself, but you must know the issues. She stared at him for what felt like a very long time. 100 things or more flashed through her mind. The call. The bodies in the gibbets. Damfair's dangerous madness. Father's comments about his plans for the north. He probably thought that his secret was unknown to her. If so, he was wrong. She'd seen enough to put the pieces together. She wasn't an idiot. She also knew that the very thought of attacking the north, of attacking Winterfell, now made her uneasy. She made her choice. Nuncle, I cannot fight my father. But that does not mean that I will fight you. You have the right of it in this case. He nodded at her and then directed a brief wintry smile at her. Keep your eyes on the horizon, Asher. Send word if you see or hear anything odd. And smell the wind, especially when it blows from the north. If you smell foul things, steer for 10 Towers. Riding back to the quay, she was in a thoughtful, dark, even mood. Her nuncle's words had shaken her. Shaken her more than she could admit. Her nuncle was looking for answers. Where could those answers be found? Wait. Old Gram. Where was she again? When she reached the ship, she found Hakon sitting on a bollard and using a honing stone on his knife. What news? Alex gone. Deserted. Died. What from? Stupidity. How so? He thought that he was better at using a knife than me. And before that, that he could lecture me about taking orders from a woman. Oh, and he also seemed to be a very religious man. All told, he died of stupidity. Oh. Then she shrugged. Hire someone to replace him then. We stay the night here. Have the ship reprovisioned. We sail on the morning tide. Where to? Great Wyk. There's someone there I need to talk to. Robert. The Street of Steel was the kind of place that made any man feel alive. So many people, so many horses, so much noise, the smoke and sparks, the pounding of metal on metal. Oh, and now the cheers. Men and women cheered him as he rode down the street, with Sir Barristan by his side, with cries of "Long live good King Robert, and long live the King." He nodded genially at them and gave them his best flashing smile. It was good to be the king on a day like this. Sir Barristan pointed to one side and he nodded. The shop that they stopped at was a large one and a very well-appointed one. This was the workplace of a man who knew the value of good equipment. He could see that at one. Dismounting, he tied up his horse himself. What's the name of the merchant again, Sir Barristan? Toib Homart, your grace. He's an Isozi and a very skilled one. Nodding at this, he strode in. The workshop was very well appointed indeed, and he nodded at the workmanship on some of the weapons he could see on display. Hello. Is Toib Homart here? Yes, I'm coming, a man called out Toneside crossly. A door opened and a man entered. He was balding, with the shoulders of a smith. Not that he was using one of his arms at the moment, his right arm was in a sling. The moment he saw him he stopped dead and then bowed deeply. "Your Grace. How may I help you?" "I have a sword that I need you to have a look at," Robert rumbled as he unslung Stormbreaker and then pulled it from its scabbard before placing it carefully on a workbench. "It's my family sword, the sword of the Durandons, and I've only recently rediscovered it. That said, it's occurred to me that I know nothing about it. It never needs to be honed, and the more I use it, the lighter it seems. Odd. So I would know more about it." Mart stared at it and then nodded slowly. "I can do my best, Your Grace. I might have to call on my apprentice, damn it, my ex-apprentice now, but he's still here for a few days to help out, as I might need help because of my arm. A bad injury. Foolishness on my part." He went slightly pink. "She was heavier than I thought," he muttered quietly. "But worth it." Then he stepped forwards and looked at the sword. After a moment he frowned. "The sword of Duran, God's grief, yes. There are tales of this sword, Your Grace. Odd ones. Sir Barristan Selmy said to one side. It's a sword that was said to turn aside lightning and embolden faint thirds. It's even said that it gave warnings, but just how it did that is not said." Mart moved closer to the sword and then stared at the metal with a frown on his face that deepened by the moment. Then he straightened up and turned to the door. "Gendry. Master. Get in here." "Can't, Master, this steel needs to be quenched properly. I'll be there as soon as I finish it." There was something about the voice that rang a faint bell at the back of his head, but he shook it off as Mart stamped over to another workbench and then used his good hand to open a drawer, muttering as he did so. When he turned back he was holding a small round object, which he then put to his eye, scrunching his eyebrow and cheek up to hold it in place. It seemed to have some kind of lenses in it, because as he walked back to the sword Robert could see that his eye appeared to be massively enlarged. It was unsettling. "A payment from a Mirish merchant for some work I did on a sword for him," Mart muttered. "It lets me see things close up." Then he leant back over the sword and inspected it intently. Robert watched him. The man seemed to be increasingly puzzled by something. He was about to ask him what was wrong, when all of a sudden the smith straightened up. "Your Grace, may I use a tuning hammer on this sword? I want to hear what it sounds like when the metal rings." He stared at the man. "You want to sound the sword?" "Aye." "Very well." Mart rummaged in a desk to one side and then pulled out a small hammer. As he did there was movement to one side and another man entered. He was well muscled and wore a blacksmithing apron. He also had a cloth over his head that seemed to be soaking up the sweat that was trickling down his face. "Master. Lift the sword a little, Gendry." "Yes, Master." The apprentice reached out and lifted the sword by the pommel. As the smith gently tapped the sword Robert heard a melodious chime from it that seemed to ripple through his very bones. "Odd," said the smith. "I have no idea what this metal is, Your Grace." "None at all." It is a mystery to me. The first men used bronze, the Andals steel. I know both metals well. The Valyrians invented their own way to forge steel, the secret of which is lost. It is the greatest mystery, for smiths, maesters, all who work with metal. Some, myself included, can rework Valyrian steel. But none can make it from new. And now, there is a new mystery. This. I truly do not know what this is made from. It is no metal that I am familiar with at all. I cannot even tell by the sound. That dull noise is odd as well." "Dull?" Robert asked, confused. "You've been by your forge for too long, man. It did not sound dull when you tapped it. It chimed." "Your Grace." Mart and Sir Barristan both looked confused. "It chimed." "I heard no chime," Sir Barristan said with a frown. "Odd." "Your Grace," the apprentice said hesitantly, "I heard it chime as well. Like a bell." "Not now, Gendry," Mart barked, but Robert was now intrigued. "Take that sweat rug off your head, lad. You're the apprentice." "Former apprentice," the lad said dully. "I've been told I'm to work by the docks now." And then he pulled the cloth off his head. Robert openly stared at him. Blue eyes. Black hair. That Baratheon jaw. It was like looking at a younger version of himself. He could see that Sir Barristan saw it too. And marked, well, he was looking a bit shifty. Robert rubbed at his temple for a moment. Oh gods! Gendry, is it? Yes, your grace. You look familiar to me, lad. Who was your mother? The lad stared at his feet. Don't rightly know, your grace. She died when I was very young. She worked at an alehouse. And your father? Robert prompted gently. The apprentices shook his head. Don't know, your grace. That's why I haven't got a last name. How long have you been working here? The lad looked deeply puzzled at the sudden change in the direction of the conversation. Some years now, your grace. A man brought me here. Can't remember who he was now. Robert stared at him and then he looked at Mart, whose shifty look intensified. Who brought him here? The smith looked at him. A man I'd never seen before, your grace. He paid me twice the normal fee for an apprentice. Not that he needed to. The lad had a knack with a hammer. Oh, he knew. He might have been an Essosi though. His accent was good, but I could tell he was once from Essos. Varys. It had to be him. He had seen to the matter of young Edric. How many more bastards did he have? It was an unsettling thought. Then he looked back at Gendry, who was staring at the sword. Your mother, which alehouse? And can you remember anything at all about your mother? Gendry frowned in concentration. Crossed Keys, I think. And, she had blonde hair, your grace. The Crossed Keys, he remembered that place. Oh, but remembered it. What had her name been again? Bessie. No, that was the one with the massive tits. Ah. Oh. Alis. She'd had the most amazing smile. Alis, he said out loud. Her name was Alis. She was from the Stormlands, originally. That's why I remember her. You have a last name, lad? Gendry Storm. The lad looked at him, and Robert could see what looked suspiciously like tears in his eyes, but that he was not going to cry. No, he wasn't going to shed a tear. Had to be a man. So you're here for a few days? And then down the docks? Robert asked, keen to move away. I'll talk to you again, lad. And on the matter of your father, I need to talk to you about that. On another day perhaps. How good an apprentice is he, Master Mart? Fair to middling. Needs to work at it. Can be a good one if he applies himself. Are you working on anything at the moment, lad? Robert asked. Thought about making a helmet, Gendry muttered. The head of a bull. Not a bad idea, Robert said. A challenge. Tell you what, once you make it, bring it to me. If it's any good, I'll have you make one for me. Only in the shape of the head of a stag. Gendry gaped at him for a moment and then tugged his forelock. Be honored to do it, your grace. Then he sniffed. Master, I need to get back to the forge. Don't like leaving it unattended. Dangerous. Your grace. Sir Barristan. And then, at their nods of dismissal, he left. Robert watched him go and then looked at Mart again. What's he really like, a smith? Mart smiled slightly. If he applies himself, a very good one. He's a steady one. A mite stubborn at times, and if you throw too many things at him he can get a little confused. But he has a big heart, he's a fierce friend. Loyal. He's had a hard life, but he's a good man. Sounds like father, Robert thought with more than a little sadness. The poor lad. He needed to do something to help him along a little. Then something occurred to him. Why is he going to the docks? I was told that was because of Lord Stannis, your grace. He saw the lad once. With, the Lord Hand. Lord Arryn. Gods, did everyone know about the lad? Did Renly know? Then he paled a little. Did Cersei? If the Scold knew about him, then he might be in danger. Stannis had the right of it, the docks was a good idea. He'd talk to him. Robert turned back to the sword. Very well, let's get back to the matter at hand, Stormbreaker. You don't know what the metal is? No, your grace. It is a mystery to me. although it might be a form of sky metal. There are many kinds and I have not seen all of them. Sky metal. Sometimes a star falls to Earth, burning a great fiery trail as it descends. They are rare, and still rarer are the ones that are intact. And some rare upon rare contain a heart of iron, the kind of iron that is unlike any other. The first men were very skilled in fashioning weapons from these things. Those that they did are famous amongst smiths. Legends, in fact. This was intriguing. Robert shared a glance with Sir Barristan, who looked almost excited. Such as. Mart stroked his chin. The Gardener kings were said to have a great spear. The Casterlis an axe, Rocktooth by name, or so it is said. Twin daggers as well. Who knows what happened to them though? Oh, and the Starks were said to have something called the Fist of Winter. A mace, I think, and a legendary one. Robert stroked his face. You said that this is the work of the first men. Aye, your grace. And possibly this sky metal. Aye, your grace. Oh, and there was another on the list. T said that the Danes of Starfall have a sword made from a fallen star. Dawn. Dawn is the work of the first men. Sir Barristan asked. He looked at Robert. "'Tis very likely, your grace. I knew Sir Arthur Dane well. He said that Dawn was unique. And very old." He looked ashamed for a moment. I liked the man, but he was deep in Rhaegar Targaryen's counsels. Robert felt his blood thunder in his ears at the mention of that bloody man, but kept his temper in check. "And Dawn was in this city recently, oddly enough." "I know," said Mart Riley. "Half the smiths I know of, including me, were hoping to catch a glimpse of it. And that is a sword that has many odd legends attached to it. It's said to be a blade that can only be borne by a Dane. A blade made with magic. Rather like the Fist of Winter. And Stormbreaker. I think, your grace, that only you and your blood can wield the blade properly." He considered this. Then he smiled. "Ironic. I love my warhammer, but I now have Stormbreaker. Ned loves that sword of his, ice, but his family once had a mace. I wonder what happened to it. Ned never mentioned any such weapon. I'll write to him." He stood up. "Master Mart, my thanks for your time. You do good work here, I can see it. You will receive commissions from the Red Keep, I swear it." "My thanks, your grace," the smith said with a bow. "I should be fit again to swing a hammer in a week or so." Robert grabbed Stormbreaker, returned it to its scabbard, and then secured it to his back again. "Good. Sir Barristan." "Training, your grace." "Aye." As he strode back to his horse he sighed a little. Why was it that he got on better with his bastards than his trueborn? If only Joffrey wasn't quite such a Lannister. He mounted with a grunt. Ah well. Chapter 12. Chapter text. Tyrion. A positive flurry of ravens had been sent out in recent hours, and if words contained power, then those ravens would be at Riverrun days early and with singed feathers. He had checked that Aemon and the rest of his men, he had become accustomed to seeing them as his men by now, had been well taken care of. They had indeed. Stark's hospitality was most generous. And the meal he had just eaten had been passing good as well. So now he headed back to Lord Stark's solar, a cup of rather good wine in one hand and with a head filled with questions. Arriving there, he was relieved to see that the door was open. He knocked politely and then entered at the gruff "come" from within. Lord Stark was sitting at his desk, with books all around him and a look of fierce determination on his face. Oddly enough, he did not look that surprised to see Tyrion walk in. Not even after he then closed the door. "What can I help you with, Lord Tyrion?" Tyrion walked to the map and stared up at it. "Your map of the North is a very good one, Lord Stark. Very detailed. Very impressive. Especially," he waved a hand upwards, "the area north of the wall. More detailed than any other map of the area that I have ever seen." Lord Stark leant back in his chair and then shot Tyrion a look that made him intensely uncomfortable. "I had information from a very well-informed source." "Really?" He found a chair and then sat, before frowning at the map. "There are far more settlements there than I had thought." "Aye." Lord Stark's eyes glittered. "Wildlings, Lord Tyrion. Thousands of them. Far more than we ever imagined. And the map shows where the northernmost villages used to be. No more. They've been abandoned. They are moving south. He stroked his chin and then took another sip of wine. Moving south. Interesting. Is it because they've heard the call? Lord Stark's look intensified still further, something that he hadn't previously thought was possible. Did you hear the call? No, he conceded reluctantly. But I felt something. I think I was asleep when you sent out whatever it was. But I have talked to a lot of people who did hear it. Clearly enough to allow me to quote it to you now. The others come. The Stark calls for aid. You are needed. Lord Stark, it was even heard in the Iron Islands, where they are now killing each other, because of this call. This startled the Lord of the North, who sat up a little. Killing each other. We heard word of unrest in the islands, but why should they kill each other? Apparently Damfair Greyjoy denies this call and is killing those Ionban who speak about sending aid to Winterfell and to the wall. Odd, is it not? Lord Stark muttered something under his breath in a language that might have been the old tongue, before looking back at the desk. More Greyjoy idiocy, he finally muttered out loud. And Balon allows this. His hatred for the North runs deeper than we knew. Tyrion took another sip of wine. Interesting. Perhaps it was time to be totally unlike father. It would be refreshing to imagine his reaction. Lord Stark, do you know why my father sent me to Winterfell? Another intense look, followed by a wry smile. You said that you were just delivering some books from Casterly Rock. Knowing your father though, there had to be something more. Let me guess, he thinks that all this talk of the others is a new gambit in the Game of Thrones that he's so obsessed with. He felt his eyebrows twitch upwards with surprise at Lord Stark's astuteness. Father had always talked about Lord Stark with a certain degree of contempt. The Honourable Lord Stark, a man who put honour ahead of good sense, father had once said of him. Honourable idiot, more like. It seemed that there was more to Lord Stark than met the eye. Yes, he admitted. My father sent me to find out what you were up to. Then I heard talk of this call. And then I saw preparation for war. Winter too. And then I noticed that this is not the last time that the North has prepared for and fought such a war. Lord Stark, I have seen the crags that litter the North, those that can be seen from the King's Road at least. And the signs of the old signal network. Oh, and there were these. He pulled out the little pouch and passed it over to Lord Stark, who opened it with a frown. The moment that they saw the obsidian arrowheads inside, his face went blank. You're a very observant man, Tyrion Lannister, he said quietly as he replaced the contents carefully. Then he placed the bag to one side, before reaching out and taking a small leather pouch of his own from his desk, before tossing it over to Tyrion. What do you observe from that? Tyrion opened it with a frown of his own. Oh, look. Obsidian arrowheads. You seem to know what these mean, then. Why use this stone? Does it have a special quality? It does indeed. We think that it kills others. The first men called it glitter glass, and it seems that they often sent it to Winterfell when it was discovered. Tyrion went very still. Did you say glitter glass? Aye. Obsidian, some call it dragon glass too. But the old days it was known as glitter glass. All of a sudden he wanted to close his eyes and place his head on the table. Oh, father would not like this at all. Instead he smiled sardonically and sipped some more wine. There is a room in Casterly Rock, Lord Stark. An old one, deep underground. It has runes carved on the walls. Most are illegible. But a few words can be read. One of them is glitter glass. Mirth and something more sparkled in Lord Stark's eyes. Really? He stood and poured a goblet of wine for himself, before topping up Tyrion's own goblet. Does your father know? More than likely. Interesting. That means that the Casterlys were sending obsidian to Winterfell. I wonder how father will fit that into his ponderings over your activities. Lord Stark shrugged. Your father was hand to the Mad King. It was his job to try and work out if people were playing their thrice-damned Game of Thrones. He had to work out if mere shadows were actual threats, and if apparent threats were mere shadows. He leant back in his chair again, until his own face was half in shadow. The threat beyond the wall is real, however. We face an enemy that we have not fought for tens of centuries. An enemy that we know little of. I am told that you are a clever man, Tyrion Lannister. Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall, sat where you sit now not too long ago and said that the others were the reason why the wildlings were fleeing south. South to the wall. Did you know that he said that he can call on 100,000 wildlings? I see you unconvinced, but look again at the map. All those villages. So, then. What is your initial impression of the situation we all of Westeros face? Tyrion stared at Lord Stark and then looked back at the map. Ah. His eyes swept across the map and then at the wall. It was such a thin line. He really wished that he could see it right now. Measure its height. Its width. The measure of the men on the wall. Their hearts. Their courage. If the wildlings truly believe that the others are coming, and if this raider fellow really does have 100,000 wildlings at his command, then the Night's Watch is in deep trouble. It's worse than that. With every wildling that dies there's a corpse left behind. And we know that the others can raise the dead, which then become what we call whites. For a moment rotten smell seemed to pass under Tyrion's nose as he remembered that damn dream. And the terror he'd felt in that dream. The dead march on the north. They do. Ice ran up and down his spine for a moment. Then he drained his cup. You seem very convinced about this, Lord Stark. I have seen them. In a vision sent by the old gods. Tyrion peered at Lord Stark. He seemed sane, but his words. I beg your pardon. Tyrion Lannister, what do you think was responsible for the call? It was magic. Things have been unearthed here in Winterfell. One of them sent out the call when an artifact from Last Hearth was placed in it. We have been discovering things. Things like that mace. He looked over to where Lord Stark was pointing. That mace was a huge weapon that would no doubt gladden the heart of Robert Baratheon. It was also, by its appearance, a very old one. And a very odd one. It seemed to have bits of obsidian in it. Ah! Connections clattered into place in his head and he pinched the bridge of his nose tiredly. Damn it. He hated it when he was right about things that father would say were mad. Lord Stark, I am growing convinced on this matter, but then I have seen much to convince me. That said, my father is the man that must be convinced, out of all the Lannisters. He is the one who has the power to send the kind of help to the wall that the Westerlands can provide. My father will require proof of the others. Proof of whites. I know, said Lord Stark quietly. My brother, the first ranger of the Night's Watch, is ranging north of the wall now. He's on a dangerous mission, a mission I could not ask of anyone else. He seeks to bring me the hand of a white. Will that convince Tywin Lannister? He was impressed, he had to admit it. That would indeed impress my father. That is, along as such a thing could still be moving and not rotted to pieces. You must know how much warmer the Westerlands are than the north. This brought another thin smile to the face of the Lord of Winterfell. He reached to one side and held up a small cage made of some metal. The first men, it seems, thought of that. A white's hand will be preserved in that. It will be proof to send to the south and to Casterly Rock. Imaging father's reaction to the moving hand of a dead man brought an instant smirk to his face. Yes, that should be a sight to see. The great Tywin Lannister will probably spit out any wine he might be drinking, possibly even show some emotion. Lord Stark's eyebrow flickered upwards at the bitterness that permeated Tyrion's last words and he cursed internally. He shouldn't show how much anger he felt at father's disdain and aloofness for him. Better to mask it with laughter than drown in bitterness. Someone knocked on the door and they both looked at it. Who is it? Robb, father. And Daisy. We need to talk to you. Enter. The door opened to reveal Robb Stark, who escorted Daisy Shuristone in. She had formality in her very stance and her every step. She also had a book in her hands. A very thick book. She looked at Tyrion for a moment, smiled slightly but then turned that very serious gaze onto her cousin, who stood as she approached. Lord Stark, the Shuristone of Shuristone is here to deliver the burden of knowledge to you. The others return. The Stark has called for aid. Shuristone has answered. And with that she solemnly handed the book over. Lord Stark took the book and stared at it. "Thank you," he said with some emotion. Then he paused. "Daisy, what is this?" "My father had many secrets, ones that he told Brandon. But he did not tell me." Daisy Sherestone went white as a sheet for a moment and then she nodded. "Father was always afraid of that. You hold his life's work. He made a new copy of the old histories, transcribing every rune of the oldest ones and every description